I believed in marriage.
She married for better, for worse, no matter what.
But the worst comes quickly.
He told me he was in love with another woman.
Tracy fell to her knees and told him not to leave her.
Tracy's hopes and prayers fall on deaf ears.
We don't trust him, and he's a liar.
Taylor told me that her father and her went with this other woman.
Until death do us part becomes the only way out.
He premeditated this. He planned it.
He put a blindfold around my eyes. I thought it was going to be something romantic. I couldn't wait for my surprise.
It was cheaper to pay for a funeral than a divorce lawyer.
I love my family. Family has always been important to me. Stay-at-home mom, a dad that worked very hard, 2 to 3 jobs a week. He was a worker. If your hands weren't dirty, he said you didn't work today. I'm the oldest. I have a sister, Kelly, and a brother, Ray. It was a really good childhood.
Tracy Wygant comes from a devout Catholic family in upstate New York. In the 1960s, she is a child growing up in an idyllic suburban life.
A lot of neighborhood kids hung out all day on their bikes. My parents had an above-the-ground pool.
My mom would make everybody lemonade and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Everybody came to our house to swim, and people wanted to be in our house.
Including the nuns of St. Mary's from the local convent, who adopt the Wygant family as their own.
They came to our house for picnics. The neighbors would see a carload of nuns getting out and sitting in the back with us and barbecuing.
My dad worked at Mount St. Mary's Convent. He was their plumber, and he ended up doing everything. We would go for Mass on Christmas Eve down at their church. Being with these sisters, the Catholic religion, it was constantly there. It's just really special to have them in our lives.
Tracy is so sheltered by her family life, she is tormented when one day she finds herself the target of a bully at school.
There was one instance where we were on the bus and he made fun of her and she started crying. I had a pickle in a jar from a science class experiment that I forgot was in my duffel bag. When he was walking off the bus, I swung my duffel bag and hit him across the back of the head. I'm sure it hurt, and I told him to leave my sister alone.
The problem with me, I was very shy and very timid.
My sister Tracy is the older sister. She's 3 years older than I am. But I really do believe that that is the day where I took on that role of trying to protect her.
When I turned 18, I went to Mount St. Mary's College in Newburgh in 1978, and then I just went into teaching.
Between studying and a part-time job, Tracy doesn't go out much.
When I was in college, I didn't dorm in this school. I wanted to be home.
But one day, when a friend asks her out on a double date, she accepts, and it's a date with destiny.
We decided to go out for dinner, and she comes with a man. He's a very nice-looking man. Brown hair, mustache, because they were big back in those days. And we seemed to talk a lot.
Tracy finds herself ignoring her date and is attracted to her friend's date, whose name is Chris Chanowitz. He's a local guy who works at a commercial offset printers.
He comes from a family of 5 kids. He grew up Catholic in the town of Newburgh, about 10 minutes from where I lived. I did think he was cute.
Tracy doesn't see Chris again until a few months later when she spots him outside a mall in Newburgh.
Kelly and I were going out for dinner, and I pointed Chris out to my sister, And she said, go give him your phone number. I remember being very nervous, and I went up to him and I said, call me sometime. And he called me the next day.
On their first date, Chris and Tracy go out for pizza and hit it off. Tracy has never had a serious boyfriend, and soon she is falling in love.
I had butterflies in my stomach and I couldn't eat. I felt that feeling like lovesick or something. And then when I would come out of college, he would leave notes for me on my car. And every week he gave me a rose. I couldn't wait to go to my car and see the note. Like, you know, that was fun. That was like happiness.
Chris liked her because she has a good heart. She's sensitive, she's sweet. She was about to have a career. She treated him really, really well. She made him a priority in her life. He seemed absolutely perfect for her.
On Halloween night, just 8 months after they meet, Chris plans a special surprise.
We were going out to the movies and he was really late. And I was mad that he was late. And he gave me a plastic pumpkin, and inside was all this candy. And I looked and there was a box. It was a diamond engagement ring. He never really came out and said, would you marry me or anything like that. It was like typical me. Took it, put it on, we're getting married. None of the words were said.
We felt happy for Tracy when she got engaged. We did like Chris, and we were happy that he was going to be a part of our family.
It felt good. It felt romantic. We got married in the convent.
I was the maid of honor at Tracy's wedding. Tracy got married at the Dominican Sister Mother House Chapel. We always described it as like being in The Sound of Music. Right in front of you was the Hudson River. It was a dream of my parents for us to get married there.
It was all marble, all white, and all the nuns were there. My limo broke down. We got to the church late, and one of Chris's friends told me that he was upset, he was worried because I was late. And that always made me feel happy, that he cared for me, that he loved me. That made me happy.
Soon, the newlyweds move into an apartment and settle into a routine.
He left the commercial offset printers and he worked for Texaco company, and then he got a job in IBM. I was teaching in Newburgh. I got hired in August of that summer, '84.
Chris works the night shift on an assembly line.
And so I was home every night by myself. And I hated that. My sister, Kelly, and my mom, we would go out shopping on Saturdays. So Friday nights, a lot of times I went and I slept at my parents' house.
Tracy finds her first year especially challenging.
The discipline was so tough on me. I remember cans of crayons being thrown over my head, and it was very, very difficult on me. He went to work with me crying in the bathroom, in the corner, hysterical, like having a nervous breakdown, because the behavior was so bad, and I couldn't get a handle on it. I didn't know what to do. If he gave me some love, some hugs, telling me it's gonna be okay, I probably would have been great, because that's all I needed. But he didn't.
Tracy has her heart set on buying land and building her dream home, but it is difficult to save money. Chris gets a second job at a local business as a salesman.
He got a job at a woman's store with all women. And then women would leave notes on his car. It didn't matter if they were pretty, ugly, didn't matter what they looked like, he still flirted with them. Women shouldn't be leaving notes on his car. He's a married man.
Tracy complains to Chris about his flirting, but he doesn't stop.
He never hesitated telling Tracy that other women were looking at him. He did like to make her insecure, because then she clung on to him a little bit more, and he liked that attention.
After 4 years, they're no closer to buying a home. So Tracy and Chris come up with a new plan to save money.
We gave up the apartment, and I went to my parents' house, and he went to his parents' house. We lived off my paycheck and put his in the savings. I just never knew what he made. He never brought a paycheck home and showed me.
Tracy asked him if she could go stay at his parents as well. And he said there was no need for that, that she was better off in her house, in her own bedroom. We just thought it was all so weird. It was hard on the marriage, and Tracy cried a lot. She wanted to be with him, and he just kept saying to her, "You want a house, don't you? This is what we have to do to get the house."
For 2 years, Tracy and Chris continue their unusual arrangement, seeing each other as much as their busy schedules allow. Finally, their sacrifice pays off. They save enough to buy their own home, or at least Tracy does.
She has to pay for it all. We don't know where he would have the money saved for any of this.
We decided we were going to get a piece of land and put a modular home on there. We put a down payment on a home.
But before they break ground, in front of friends and family, Chris drops a bombshell that will ruin everything.
He told me he was in love with another woman. Her name was Shannon. He said that he was backing out of building a house. It was awful.
So Shannon was a woman who worked at the mall, who Tracy would see him talking to all the time, and never thought he would ever be with her. But what was even more shocking was Tracy's reaction to it. Tracy fell to her knees, held onto his leg, cried, and told him not to leave her.
Being a nice Catholic girl, you don't get divorced. I didn't know what to do.
Tracy Wygant's husband, Chris, has just told her he is having an affair with another woman.
Basically, what I did is put my head in the ground. It was sad. I didn't know where to turn, what to do. I didn't tell my friends.
He was done. But he wasn't done for her.
This is all I got. How am I going to get anything in the future if I don't fight for him?
6 months go by. Tracy continues to live at home, hoping Chris will eventually reconcile.
I had to go and get the money back for the down payment. There was no talk of divorce. And I would go to the church where we got married, and I would go in there by myself and just pray for everything to get better. And I would do that a lot.
And then one day, he shows up at her work unexpectedly.
And he had with him pamphlets for condos. So we started looking at condos. I was hopeful, because why would he do that?
Chris tells her he is no longer seeing the other woman.
I'm thinking everything's back, everything's fine. She doesn't exist anymore. It's done.
Tracy and Chris start afresh, and instead of buying a condo, they find another piece of land.
It's in Walk Hill area, out by the Schwanga Mountains, and we picked out a house from a magazine. It wasn't like he was like, being all sweet and nice. I just settled and just kept going.
Within a few months, Tracy finds out she's pregnant.
When you have a body grown inside of you, it's wonderful and weird at the same time. It was also a very difficult time. We were building a house, and I'm pregnant.
Chris, he's going to be the best. He's going to build a house. He's going to make it bigger and better than everybody else's. Did they have the money for it? No. He hired people he knew, then didn't pay them. They were in debt.
Just as they finish building their new house, their daughter Taylor is born in February 1991.
Come see baby Taylor. This is baby Taylor's first Easter.
She was just absolutely beautiful.
Taylor.
Long Goldilocks hair, gorgeous.
Oatmeal and banana.
Yum, 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 yum.
Tracy goes back to work after 3 months of maternity leave. Chris is on night shift, so he takes care of Taylor during the day.
Chris took Taylor to the zoo, the park. He would meet other people, women with children, and I'm sure that he was flirting with other women. He would fulfill that role of the mother and the father with Taylor, because Tracy was working.
If we were at my sister's for a picnic, he would be with all the kids. And he would knock the parents down and say, oh, I'm down here with their kids, like he was the greatest.
Santa Claus was here. Look at all your presents.
Daddy, can I open some?
Can you open them? Sure can.
Yay!
Merry Christmas. Where's my Merry Christmas kiss?
Years go by, and Taylor grows closer to her dad, who seems to do all the fun things.
Hey, you.
I think most of my field trips, my dad came on as the parent.
Hi, I'm Taylor, and I'm at Macy's Parade. This is the fireman.
During parties, you would find him in the pool with us, having fun. My dad was always involved, always playing with the kids.
Hey, good girl.
But Chris has little time for Tracy, and their marriage suffers.
He said I have a stomach, so no sex. That was awful. We did Nutrisystem, and I got really skinny, and he still said I had a belly.
We felt that he was having an affair because there was just really no desire, no connection. And it was frustrating for me because I knew my sister was believing his lies.
Inside, I'm dying. No intimacy. I would cry and I would beg him, and he would go like this at me. Oh, really?
When her sister Kelly's family visits Disney World, Tracy suggests they join them, hopeful that a vacation might rekindle their intimacy.
Tracy really looked forward to that. The whole family walking around Disney World.
We took out a loan to take Taylor. We were together, and one night I woke up in the middle of the night and he was gone. I don't know where he was.
She said that Chris kept disappearing. We would be waiting for the parade, and he'd say, oh, he was gonna go buy Taylor or something, and he'd be gone for hours. She goes, I just have a feeling that he wasn't alone.
I was hoping for a change. I just kept waiting for that miracle to happen.
After they return, and just when Tracy is at her emotional bottom, her sister calls with more devastating news.
She told me that our mom died.
My mom's death was awful for us.
Chris had no choice. He had to be with me during that time. And then I had him go up to the casket and tell my mom not to worry, that he always would be there for me. I had him tell her that. And then it was Thanksgiving weekend. My family has a cabin in the Catskills with a gun club. So Chris says he's going up to the cabin and go hunting. And my sister could not believe that he was leaving me after my mom just died.
He would tell my father that real men don't stay in the cabin. They go off and they get a tent and they sleep in the woods.
Chris and Tracy's dad go to the cabin, but Chris disappears.
Now, Chris had a hunting gun, but he didn't hunt.
And my father, he searched to see if he could find him. And he followed his tracks, and then they just stopped.
There was no tent. He disappeared.
Chris has been picked up on the road outside the cabin by another woman. Someone who Taylor has already met.
My first memory of meeting another woman was going to the Ulster County pool. My dad told me he was going to meet a friend of his from work, and she had a little girl with her too. We remember playing with all of them in the pool. She was a few years younger than me.
Taylor plays with the little girl named Megan on more than one occasion.
We went hiking together one time up in Minnewaska. It was definitely a few times he had me go meet her. He was treating both of us kind of the same. It was bothering me. And she kept calling him Dad.
Tracy's daughter Taylor meets another girl who is calling her father Dad.
He said that she didn't have a father of her own, so he was trying to step into that role for her. And then he would make me pinky swear not to tell my mom anything about what we did.
Taylor told me that her father and her went with this other woman to some falls up by Kingston, New York. And he has her pinky swear not to tell me. And then when I questioned him about it, he just said it was a friend he ran into.
Tracy's a smart person. And I think that somewhere inside, she definitely didn't believe him. But she was so afraid of bringing it to the surface because she didn't want the consequences of what would happen to their marriage.
I was waiting for things to get better. It would get better, it would get better. I hang in there.
I feel like at my bridal shower, my baby shower.
In February of 1998, Taylor celebrates her 7th birthday. By this time, everyone but Tracy seems to be on to Chris.
I think that's the last birthday I remember with my father being there.
We believe that he's living a double life. He is off buying things and telling my husband that he has charge cards that Tracy doesn't know about. And I think he's doing it just to add fuel to all of our fire.
By the time summer arrives, Tracy and Chris have not been intimate for over 4 years.
I thought he was gay for a while. There was a manager at IBM that he kept talking about that was gay, that he hung out with. And also the lack of sex for years. So it was making me think, well, geez, maybe he is gay. I did ask questions, but they were always lies. I was gagging and throwing up. That's how bad I was. Crying. Felt like I didn't have anybody in the world.
In September, at the start of the school year, Chris starts spending time alone in the garage. He tells Tracy that he is working on something special for her.
He said to me, I have a surprise for you. Don't tell your sister about it. And I told her, because I thought it was going to be something romantic.
She just was really excited about it. And I think she felt that it was going to make their marriage better.
I was excited. I couldn't wait for my surprise.
Chris even puts up garbage bags to black out the windows in the garage so that Tracy can't peek.
I heard noises. I don't know exactly what he was doing. We also bought unfinished furniture that he would paint and stain over the years. So it could be something like that. To me, he was working on my surprise. So I didn't want to open the door and ruin it and peek.
Hey, honey.
As the weekend approaches, Chris seems to be more flirtatious.
He picked me up, and I got embarrassed, and I got shy, and I asked him to put me down. He never picked me up before, never. And I was uncomfortable with that because I'm heavy. Within a few hours later, he had me move a ladder. And I thought it was strange that he didn't do it. He had me do it.
That's great. Great.
On the evening of September 12th, 1998, Chris, Tracy, and Taylor arrive home early from a dinner with friends.
He told me about the surprise. He was getting the surprise ready. And I went to the living room while he was out in the garage.
While Taylor sleeps upstairs, Tracy waits in anticipation.
He comes in and gets me and tells me the surprise is ready. He put a blindfold around my eyes, tightened it up.
Chris places an envelope in Tracy's hand.
He told me it was part of the surprise.
She thought maybe it was airline tickets, and she was hoping it was a trip.
And he had to help me out to the garage. I was okay with it because when somebody's going to surprise you, sometimes they do that. They put blindfold on you. He opens the door and then puts me at the first step. So I'm out on the first step. He's behind me. He tells me the surprise is not ready.
Chris leads Tracy back to the couch, removes the blindfold, and she waits again.
He comes back out to the living room and tells me the surprise is ready now. He had to do a couple things. So we go through the same routine. Opens the door, helps me down to the first step.
Come on this way.
It wasn't ready. Again.
No, it's not
We go
ready.
back in. I go right back to the couch.
Finally, the surprise is ready. Chris re-blindfolds Tracy and again places the envelope in her hand.
Now it's just quiet. And I can hear him breathing behind me. Now I'm starting to get suspicious. Now I'm starting to get a little nervous.
He leads her into the garage, and Tracy waits again for what seems like eternity.
My heart was pounding out of my chest. I felt something come down my neck.
Tracy Wygant's husband, Chris, has just slipped a noose over her head.
And my reaction was to hit it off. And I quickly hit the blindfold up off me and looked up, and he was above me, and he had big gloves on. And I saw him holding the rope with a noose. I went into an out of my body experience, like numb. Is this really happening? It could have been a diamond, it could have been pearls, but it wasn't. It was a noose.
She was seconds away from death. Seconds. He was going to pull Tracy up by the noose, and he was going to hold on to it until she was dead.
I looked up, and I said to him, "What's going on?" And he let the noose go, and he went to the corner of the garage. And he was crying. He said that he was in love with another woman, and we have a child.
Tracy doesn't consider that she might still be in danger.
I thought about it more afterwards. Like, how stupid was I thinking that maybe he wouldn't take a gun and shoot me? He could have easily done that. I was shaking at this time, and I said, "I'm going to call my sister."
We were sound asleep, and it was Tracy. She was crying hysterically and wanted me to come up there. Like now. I called my father and asked him to come up to Tracy's. And I said, it's bad news. I bet it's an affair again. I went to the front door, and Chris opened the door. He looked disheveled, tired. He looked like a monster. I turned and saw Tracy sitting on the couch, and she was rocking, and she was crying. So I knelt down next to her, and I said, Tracy, what's going on? Tell me what's happening. And she said, he has another woman and a child. Her name is Megan. And I could tell she was trying to process it. And I turned to look at him, and I said to him, that was your surprise? This is your surprise?
Chris sees Tracy's father coming and leaves to go meet him outside.
That gave me the opportunity to say to Tracy, that was your surprise? And she said, no, he tried to hang me in the garage. At that point, I went into the garage area. The windows were all blackened out with black plastic bags. The ladder was standing there, and there was the news.
She said, Tracy, I have to call the police. And I'm begging her not to call the police.
Kelly calls 911.
Everything was definitely surreal that night. Everything seemed to go in slow motion.
Tracy tells Kelly that she asked Chris why he wanted to kill her.
And he said, you made me do this to you. And she said, why? What did I do? What did I do wrong? And he said, you made me do this. You would never let me go. This is bad. This is really bad. I'm very concerned about my sister because I think she's going to have a severe mental breakdown.
Tracy's dad is startled when police arrive on the scene.
And he said, why would you call the police? This is just an affair. And I looked at my father and I said, no, it's not, Dad. He tried to hang her in the garage. At that point, my father just leapt through the air and jumped on Chris. And that's when the police quickly grabbed my father and Chris.
The officers escort Chris into another room.
He was pacing, wringing his hands. He kept apologizing. He says, I wanted to do a double suicide. I wanted to kill my wife and then kill myself. I'm like, now you know that's not a double suicide. We call it murder-suicide. I said, well, how are you gonna kill yourself? He says, well, I got a gun. He showed me the gun. It was in a closet, all the way back in the closet. I found a .308 that was in there. I'm like, okay, where's the ammo? I don't know. Okay, and how are you going to off yourself with a gun if there's no ammo available? Something's not right.
Chris is arrested, but only for menacing and endangerment.
He had me move the ladder to get my prints on the ladder. Him having me hold the note was going to be a suicide letter. And he picked me up because he wanted to see how he could pull me to hang me. The police say when the surprise wasn't ready that he was trying to get his nerve up. If he did what he was going to do the first time, maybe even the second, he would have succeeded.
Tracy ended up in a psychiatric hospital.
It's like being hit with a double blow. The love of your life has just tried to kill you. You get out of it, and then he hits you with the other blow that kills your heart, it kills your soul.
The next morning, Kelly races to gain emergency custody of Taylor before Chris makes bail. Tracy Wygant spends a week in a psychiatric hospital trying to understand why her husband tried to kill her.
He wanted to look like I committed suicide.
He wanted to look like the victim. Everybody would have been crying for him and feeling bad for him, and he would have came out victorious.
If Chris had succeeded, he would have avoided a custody battle for Taylor.
He would have got the house. He would have got money from the New York State Teachers Union. They would have been set and they would have lived happily ever after, the four of them in the house. That was his goal.
It was cheaper to pay for a funeral than a divorce lawyer. I believe she saved her own life.
Tracy would never have divorced him. Even after that night, I don't think she wanted to divorce him.
After Tracy returns home from the hospital, she gets full custody of Taylor and then searches the house for evidence of Chris's double life.
I found special holiday cards, letters, fake divorce papers, mail-in divorces.
I'm sure he was showing his girlfriend that he was going through a divorce.
Proof positive that Chris was seeing other women throughout their marriage.
One card I opened up and it was a Valentine's card and it had a voice. Happy, happy hard day. We love you very much. Love, Kathy and Taylor. So it was not good for me. So my family almost had to bring me back to the hospital. That was hard.
There was a photo of Shannon in Disney World the same time that Tracy, Chris, and Taylor took their Disney World trip. So when he was disappearing, he was meeting Shannon.
February 5th, 1999, 5 months after the attack, a grand jury in Ulster County, New York, upgrades Chris's menacing charge to attempted murder in the second degree.
Usually, the one who is unhappy should be the one that takes a drastic measure. But he wanted to maximize his happiness. He wanted to have everything that they had built together to himself. So she was expendable to him.
Just over a year later, in 2000, they go to trial.
He sat there acting like he did nothing wrong. He was the perfect husband who wanted a divorce. That's it.
He told the jury that he was trying to tell me it was over.
His defense was he was just trying to scare her into a divorce because she never would have left him.
The last time I saw my dad was when we went to court, and it was just for a split second. I was set to testify, give my own statements, and I was halfway through the door, and the judge decided he didn't need my testimony, so I was immediately scooched back and out of the room.
Tracy and Kelly take the stand, but the evidence is airtight.
I was in a little bit of a fighting spirit at that time, but still very timid, still beaten up. It was tough with his lawyer, but I held my own.
What I think went wrong with Chris's plan was that he lost his nerve, but I also think that he could have done it.
By unanimous vote, a jury finds Chris Chanowitz guilty of attempted murder, and he is sentenced to 15 years in prison.
I was looking at him when I read my victim response for the sentencing. He wouldn't let me look at him because it was very heartfelt. I cried. Yeah, I was upset. I cried. I did that for a couple weeks.
Tracy and Taylor sell the house and start rebuilding their lives in a new home.
I am proud of how Tracy came out of this. For the last 25 years, she has built a little life for her and Taylor in this house. She has made it a showstopper. People stop and take pictures. She does gardening outside. And that has been her sanctuary.
After serving 13 years, Chris gets out of jail in 2013 and moves back to Wallkill.
I walk up in my front yard to go do something, and there he drives by. We make eye contact sometimes.
I was in Home Depot. I just happened to go around the corner, and there he was. And I started yelling for security. I said there was an attempted murderer in the store, and security was running. I told him, you better leave. He almost killed my sister. I was screaming at him on top of my lungs, and he left.
Taylor rejects her father for what he did to her mother. And now Tracy is retired from teaching and has found new love.
Steve worked for the town of Newburgh. He was a fireman for over 50 years. He just loves me so much, and I love him. Matter of fact, I'm missing him right now. He's done so much for me. I hit the jackpot.
She finally has found the perfect man for her who wants to take care of her and who truly, truly loves her. I feel like I have my older sister back.
My mom's very funny. She enjoys goofing off, never really acts her age, always singing and dancing around the house, even if it can drive me crazy sometimes.
I'm able to do it because Steve's in my life. And that's given me the strength. And I think God knows now that I have the strength to do this.
The rain started before midnight, a thin, cold drizzle that clung to the quiet streets of rural Oregon like a whisper no one wanted to hear. By morning, the town of Ashwood would wake to a mystery that refused to die, a disappearance so sudden, so strange, it would haunt investigators for decades. At 6:12 a.m., a jogger cut through the narrow gravel path behind Mill Creek Park. The trail was usually empty that early. Just fog drifting low across the grass and the dull hum of highway traffic far away. But that morning something fell off. A silver sedan sat crooked near the treeline, driver's door half open, headlights still faintly glowing through the mist. The engine was cold. The keys were still in the ignition. Inside the car, a purse lay on the passenger seat. Wallet, credit cards, driver's license. Everything exactly where it should be, except the owner. Her name was Emily Carson, 27 years old, local schoolteacher, known around town for her quiet smile and the habit of staying late at school to help struggling students. She lived alone in a small apartment 2 blocks from the elementary school where she taught 2nd grade. The night before she vanished, nothing about her routine had seemed unusual. She left school around 5, bought groceries at a nearby market, spoke briefly with the cashier about the rain coming in. A neighbor later told police they saw her walk into her apartment building carrying a bag of oranges and a carton of milk. That should have been the end of the story. But sometime between dusk and midnight, Emily Carson vanished without a trace. When police arrived at the park that morning, the fog still hadn't lifted. Patrol lights flashed blue against the wet pavement as officers circled the abandoned sedan. No broken glass. No blood. No sign of a struggle. Just the quiet ticking sound of cooling metal and the faint smell of damp pine drifting from the forest. Detectives noticed something strange immediately. Emily's coat was still folded neatly in the back seat. Her phone, an old flip model common in the late 90s, rested inside her purse. Whoever left the car had walked away without taking anything, which made no sense. The gravel around the vehicle had turned to mud from the rain. Yet investigators found almost no footprints leading into the woods. A few shallow impressions near the driver's door, then nothing. As if whoever stepped out had simply disappeared. By noon, word spread through Ashwood like a shockwave. It was the kind of town where people rarely locked their doors. Population barely 8,000. 1 main street, 2 diners, a high school football field that filled with cheering families every Friday night. Violent crime was almost unheard of. But now police tape cut across the entrance to Mill Creek Park, and helicopters circled slowly above the trees. Search teams combed the forest for hours. Volunteers lined up along muddy trails, calling Emily's name into the thick fog. Dogs picked up faint scents that vanished abruptly near the creek bank. Divers searched the cold, dark water. Nothing. No body. No clothing. No sign she had ever been there. Within days, the case became the biggest story in the county. Reporters stood outside the police station every morning waiting for updates that never came. Flyers with Emily's face covered storefront windows across town. Her parents drove in from Portland, begging for answers through tear-streaked interviews with local news stations. And then the rumors started. Some residents believed Emily had run away. Others whispered about a stranger seen driving slowly through neighborhoods weeks earlier. A few insisted they heard a scream near the park sometime after midnight, though none of those accounts could ever be confirmed. Detective Daniel Harper was assigned as lead investigator. Harper had spent nearly 20 years working homicide across Oregon. He was known for patience, methodical thinking, and an almost stubborn refusal to abandon a case. To him, every disappearance left a pattern somewhere, a thread waiting to be pulled. But the Emily Carson case had almost nothing to pull from. Her apartment showed no sign of forced entry. Her bank account remained untouched. Phone records revealed only routine calls with coworkers and family. The timeline itself was a puzzle. Why would a young teacher leave her apartment late at night and drive alone to a deserted park during a rainstorm? Friends insisted she hated the woods after dark. She once joked during a camping trip that the sounds of trees moving in the wind felt like something watching. Yet there her car was, parked beside the forest. Door open. Driver gone. Harper returned to the scene again and again during those first weeks, walking slowly along the muddy trails while rain dripped from the branches overhead. Something about the location bothered him. Something just beyond reach of logic. One detail refused to leave his mind. The position of the driver's seat. Emily was barely 5'3". According to her friends, she always moved the seat far forward to reach the pedals comfortably. But when officers examined the car that morning, the seat had been pushed several inches back, as if someone taller had been driving. That discovery shifted the investigation overnight. Suddenly, detectives were no longer searching for a missing person wandering lost in the forest. They were hunting for a possible abductor, someone who had been inside Emily Carson's car. Fingerprints were collected from every surface: steering wheel, door handles, rearview mirror. Most belonged to Emily. A few matched friends who had ridden with her before. But one partial print lifted from the inside of the driver's door couldn't be identified. It didn't match anyone in the local database. At the time, national fingerprint systems were still limited, and the print was too incomplete for a reliable comparison. Still, Harper kept it sealed carefully in the evidence file. Because instinct told him this case wasn't random. Someone had planned something. Weeks turned into months. Searches expanded beyond the park. Remote logging roads were checked. Wells and abandoned barns inspected. Detectives followed tips from across the state, sightings of a woman resembling Emily in gas stations, bus terminals, roadside diners. Every lead ended the same way: dead. By winter, the headlines faded. Emily Carson's disappearance slowly transformed into what investigators dread most: a cold case. Files moved from active desks into long gray storage cabinets. The search team stopped coming. The helicopters disappeared. But Detective Harper refused to let go. He kept a personal notebook in his desk drawer. A worn leather diary where he wrote observations no official report would include. Thoughts. Questions. Small inconsistencies others overlooked. One entry from December 1998 read simply: car seat moved. Someone else drove. Another line appeared days later: if she didn't drive to the park, who did? The theory Harper began forming was unsettling. Maybe Emily never planned to go there at all. Maybe someone else took her car after she disappeared, staging the scene beside the woods to confuse investigators. But without a body, without witnesses, without solid evidence, it remained only speculation. Years passed. Ashwood grew slowly. New houses appeared along the edge of town. Children who once had Emily Carson as their teacher graduated high school and moved away. The case file gathered dust. Yet every anniversary of her disappearance, Harper opened his diary and added another entry. Sometimes only a single sentence. Sometimes just a question mark. Then, in 2007, nearly a decade after Emily vanished, a hunter made a discovery deep in the forest 30 miles north of Mill Creek Park. A fragment of bone partially buried beneath fallen leaves. Forensic teams rushed to the site. More bones were uncovered scattered across a narrow ravine, weathered by time, bleached pale by years of sun and rain. The remains belonged to a woman, but the terrain had been disturbed by animals and erosion. Clothing fragments were almost completely gone. No wallet, no jewelry, no obvious identification. Investigators hoped DNA testing might finally confirm Emily Carson's fate. The results came back weeks later. The remains did not belong to her. Another dead end. Another mystery layered on top of the first. Detective Harper wrote a single line in his diary that night. Someone else is out there. By 2015, Harper retired from the police department after 37 years in law enforcement. His colleagues held a quiet farewell gathering in a small diner on Main Street. Speeches were made. Stories told. But when Harper packed the last box from his office, one item went with him that technically shouldn't have left the building. The leather diary. Inside were 17 years of thoughts about one case that had never stopped haunting him. Emily Carson. The missing teacher. The abandoned car in the rain. The footprints that vanished into nothing. Retirement gave Harper something he had never truly had before. Time. Time to reread every report. Time to study every photograph from the scene. Time to ask questions no active detective had the resources to pursue anymore. And slowly, buried among hundreds of pages of notes, one detail began to surface again and again, a name mentioned only briefly in the original investigation. A man who lived less than half a mile from Emily's apartment in 1998. A man who had been questioned once, then quietly cleared. At the time, there had been no evidence connecting him to the disappearance. No fingerprints. No witnesses. No motive strong enough to hold him under suspicion. Just a vague, uneasy feeling Harper wrote down in the margin of an early interview transcript. Something about his story doesn't sit right. For years, that line meant nothing. But in the quiet months of retirement, Harper read it again. And this time it felt different. Because the man from that interview was still alive. Still living in Oregon. And still carrying a past no one in Ashwood had ever truly examined. The name appeared quietly in the margins of an old report, almost forgotten beneath years of paperwork and fading ink. Michael Turner. Back in 1998, he had been 32 years old. A mechanic at a small auto repair shop on the edge of Ashwood. Divorced. Lived alone in a rented house just 4 blocks from Emily Carson's apartment. At the time of the investigation, his connection to the case seemed weak, barely noticeable among dozens of other interviews police conducted during the first frantic weeks of the search. But now, sitting at his kitchen table nearly 2 decades later, retired Detective Daniel Harper stared at the transcript again, feeling the same quiet unease that had bothered him all those years ago. Outside his window, Oregon rain tapped softly against the glass. The same cold drizzle that had fallen the night Emily disappeared. Harper flipped the page slowly. Michael Turner told investigators he had spent that night at home watching television. Alone. He claimed he fell asleep around 10:30 and didn't wake until morning. No visitors. No late-night drives. Nothing unusual. A simple alibi. Too simple, Harper now thought. Back in 1998, police had tried to verify the story. But there were no security cameras on quiet residential streets. No smartphone records. No digital footprints. If someone stayed home alone, there was almost no way to prove otherwise. So detectives moved on. The case demanded urgency. Dozens of leads poured in daily. Tips from across the state. Possible sightings of Emily. Anonymous calls about suspicious strangers. Michael Turner faded into the background. But Harper's diary told a different story. One entry dated October 14th, 1998, barely a week after Emily vanished, described a strange detail from Turner's interview. Asked if he knew Emily Carson. Pause before answering. Harper could almost hear that pause again now, replaying the moment in his mind like an old recording. The interview room had been small, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Turner sat with his arms folded across his chest, speaking calmly. Maybe too calmly. When asked if he recognized Emily's name, he hesitated just long enough for the silence to feel uncomfortable. Then he shook his head and said no. At the time, it didn't seem like much. But in a small town like Ashwood, most residents knew each other at least by sight, especially neighbors who lived only a few blocks apart. Harper turned another page. More notes. Works on cars. Lives alone. No criminal record. Then, scribbled near the bottom of the page in darker ink. Something off. The problem was, instinct alone couldn't reopen a case. Evidence had to exist. And for 17 years, none had surfaced. Harper leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. Retirement had changed his life in strange ways. Without the constant pressure of active cases, old memories now had space to grow louder. Emily Carson's face had never left him. He remembered the photograph used in the missing person flyers. Brown hair pulled into a loose ponytail, a soft smile that made her look younger than 27. Teachers from her school described her as patient, kind, almost shy. She spent weekends tutoring students who struggled with reading. She called her parents every Sunday evening without fail. Nothing in her life suggested danger, which was exactly what made her disappearance so disturbing. Harper stood and walked to a small cabinet near the wall. Inside sat a cardboard box filled with copies of the original case files he had quietly made before retiring. He lifted out a plastic evidence photo, the image of Emily's abandoned silver sedan sitting beside the forest in Mill Creek Park. The door open, the interior light glowing faintly in the fog, and the driver's seat pushed back farther than it should have been. That detail had always bothered him more than anything else, because if someone else had driven that car, then Emily must have already been gone, which meant the park wasn't the crime scene. It was only a stage. A place chosen to make investigators believe she vanished into the woods. Harper returned to the interview transcript. Another note caught his attention, something he had written in the margin years ago but barely remembered now. Turner's truck. He flipped through several pages until he found the relevant report. During the original investigation, officers documented vehicles owned by residents living near Emily's apartment. Turner drove a dark blue pickup truck. Older model. Slight damage to the front bumper from a previous accident. But one witness, a teenage boy delivering newspapers early in the morning, had mentioned seeing a truck parked near Emily's building late the night she vanished. The witness couldn't describe it well, just that it looked dark-colored. At the time, the statement was considered unreliable. The boy admitted it was raining heavily and visibility was poor. Still, Harper had written the observation down. And now, years later, it suddenly felt more important. He leaned closer to the page. The witness claimed the truck left the area shortly after midnight, driving slowly, headlights off until it reached the corner of the street. Harper's pulse quickened slightly, because Emily's car had been discovered at Mill Creek Park around 6 in the morning, which left several hours unaccounted for. Hours when someone could have driven her vehicle there. Staging the scene. Harper closed the folder and stared out the window. The quiet neighborhood outside looked peaceful. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalk. A dog barked in the distance. Life had continued in Ashwood as if nothing terrible had ever happened. But somewhere in that same town or somewhere nearby, a person might still know exactly what happened to Emily Carson. Harper sat back down and opened his laptop. Technology had changed dramatically since 1998. Databases now connected police departments across the country. Fingerprint systems were faster. DNA analysis more precise. Old evidence sometimes revealed new truths when tested again. But retired detectives didn't have direct access to official systems anymore. What Harper did have was patience and curiosity. He began searching public records, property databases, old news articles, anything mentioning Michael Turner. The information came slowly at first. Turner had moved several times after leaving Ashwood in the early 2000s, worked different mechanical jobs across Oregon and Northern California, eventually settled in a small town called Redvale about 2 hours south. Still unmarried. Still living alone. Harper studied a recent photograph attached to a local business listing. Turner now looked older, heavier, hair thinning at the temples. But the eyes were the same, calm, unreadable. The kind of face that revealed almost nothing. Harper printed the photo and placed it beside Emily's picture on the table. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he reached for the diary again. Another entry from 2001 caught his attention. Check repair shop records. Back then, detectives had briefly investigated the possibility that Emily's car had been serviced somewhere shortly before her disappearance. The idea was simple. Mechanics sometimes moved seats while working on vehicles. If someone had adjusted the driver's seat during a repair, it might explain the unusual position. But Emily's maintenance records showed no recent work. At least, none investigators could find at the time. Harper suddenly wondered something else. What if the car hadn't been serviced? But someone who worked on cars had been inside it anyway? Someone who knew exactly how to move a seat quickly. Someone comfortable driving another person's vehicle. His eyes drifted back to Turner's photo. A mechanic. Harper felt a slow, cold realization forming in the back of his mind. If Turner had encountered Emily that night, whether by chance or design, he would have known how to operate her car without hesitation. He would have known how to move the seat. And he would have known how to drive it somewhere else after she was gone. The thought sat heavily in the quiet room. But suspicion alone wasn't enough. 17 years had passed. Memories faded. Witnesses moved away or died. Evidence degraded with time. Still, Harper believed something might remain. Because the one piece of physical evidence from the original case had never been fully resolved. The unidentified fingerprint on the driver's door. Back in 1998, the print was incomplete, too partial for reliable comparison. Databases at the time were limited, but modern systems were different. They could sometimes match fragments that once seemed useless. If that fingerprint still existed, and if it belonged to Michael Turner, then the entire cold case could explode back to life overnight. Harper closed the diary slowly. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky above Ashwood was turning gray with the approach of evening. For nearly 2 decades, Emily Carson's disappearance had remained an unanswered question, one that quietly haunted a small town and the detective who refused to forget it. But now, sitting alone at his kitchen table, Daniel Harper felt something shifting. Not proof. Not yet. But a direction. And sometimes, in the world of cold cases, that was enough to start everything moving again. For nearly 2 decades, the case had existed in silence, a stack of reports, photographs, and unanswered questions sitting in a police archive, while the town that once searched the woods for Emily Carson slowly forgot the urgency of those first terrifying weeks. But inside Daniel Harper's small house on the quiet edge of Ashwood, the past was beginning to stir again. The fingerprint. It had always been the one physical trace investigators never solved. A partial print lifted from the inside of the driver's door of Emily's abandoned sedan, faint, incomplete, barely usable by the technology available in 1998. At the time, it had been logged into the state database and quietly filed away when no match appeared. Harper knew that piece of evidence might still exist somewhere inside the department's storage facility. Evidence in unresolved cases was rarely destroyed. Sometimes it sat untouched for decades. He checked the time. 8:17 p.m. Most of the officers currently working at the Ashwood Police Department had never met him, but the name Daniel Harper still carried weight in that building. 37 years of service had a way of leaving its mark. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. The voice that answered sounded younger than he expected. Ashwood Police Department. Harper introduced himself. There was a pause, then the tone changed immediately. Detective Harper? Wow, I've heard stories about you. Harper didn't waste time on pleasantries. I need to know if evidence from the Emily Carson case is still in storage. Silence for a moment as the officer typed. Then the answer came back. Yes, sir. It's still here. Harper closed his eyes slowly. 17 years. And the fingerprint was still sitting in a box somewhere. The next morning he drove back to the same building where he had spent most of his life chasing criminals through interviews, interrogations, and crime scenes that never left his memory. The Ashwood Police Department looked smaller than he remembered. New paint, updated signage, a digital security system by the front entrance. Inside, a young detective named Lisa Moreno met him in the lobby. She had been 6 years old when Emily Carson disappeared. Moreno had already pulled the old case file before Harper even asked. The thick folder sat on the conference table between them like a time capsule from another era. Photographs, witness statements, lab reports typed on aging paper. And inside a sealed plastic envelope, the fingerprint card. Harper held it carefully. Even after all these years, he remembered the exact shape of the smudged pattern. A partial loop, roughly half a thumbprint. Back in 1998, analysts had tried to compare it against the limited state database. But with only fragments available, the system couldn't produce a reliable match. Moreno leaned forward. Technology's a lot better now. Harper nodded. Modern fingerprint databases could analyze much smaller fragments than the systems used decades earlier. Tiny ridges that once meant nothing could now be compared against millions of records nationwide. Moreno looked at him carefully. You think it belongs to someone we already talked to? Harper didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled the printed photograph of Michael Turner from his folder and placed it on the table. Moreno studied the image. Who is he? Mechanic, Harper said quietly. Lived 4 blocks from Emily in 1998. Moreno flipped through the original interview notes until she found Turner's name buried among dozens of other residents police had questioned. Looks like he was cleared. He was, Harper said. Moreno glanced back up. But you don't think he should have been? Harper tapped the diary sitting beside the file. I wrote something after that interview. Something I couldn't prove at the time. Moreno waited. Harper spoke slowly. He paused before answering whether he knew her. Moreno raised an eyebrow. That's it. Harper shook his head. No. He slid another page forward, the report mentioning the teenage newspaper carrier who saw a dark pickup truck near Emily's apartment late that night. Moreno read the statement again. Turner owned a truck. Yes. And the witness said it drove away around midnight. Harper nodded. The rain that night washed away almost every footprint at the park, he added. If someone staged the scene hours later, it would explain why investigators found almost nothing. Moreno leaned back in her chair. The theory was simple but chilling. Emily disappears somewhere else. Her car gets driven to Mill Creek Park later. The scene is staged. Moreno looked down at the fingerprint card again. If this belongs to him, Harper finished the thought. The case reopens. Within an hour, the evidence was on its way to the Oregon State Forensics Laboratory. The fingerprint would be scanned using modern imaging systems capable of analyzing ridge fragments that older technology ignored. If a match existed anywhere in the national database, even a minor criminal record from another state, the system might find it. And if Michael Turner had ever been fingerprinted during the past 17 years, they would know. The waiting began. For Harper, waiting was nothing new. Investigations often moved slowly, built on patience and persistence. But this time the tension felt different. Because for the first time since 1998, the Emily Carson case was moving again. 3 days later, Moreno called him. Her voice sounded different. Tighter. You need to come in. Harper drove through steady afternoon traffic toward the station, his mind racing through possibilities. Maybe the fingerprint didn't match Turner at all. Maybe it belonged to someone investigators never even interviewed. Maybe the case would drift back into silence again. When he walked into the building, Moreno was already waiting near the conference room. The expression on her face told him everything before she even spoke. They got a match. Harper felt the air leave his lungs slowly. Moreno slid the report across the table. The fingerprint from Emily Carson's car had been processed through the updated national database. And it matched a record taken during a minor arrest in Northern California 8 years earlier. The name on the record, Michael Turner. Harper stared at the page. For a moment, neither detective spoke. 17 years of unanswered questions had just shifted into something real. Moreno broke the silence first. He was arrested in 2007 for a bar fight, she explained. Nothing serious. Charges dropped. But they took his prints. Which meant his fingerprints had finally entered the national system, something that hadn't existed when Emily vanished in 1998. Harper felt the weight of the moment settle over him. The unidentified fingerprint inside Emily Carson's car belonged to the mechanic who lived 4 blocks away. Moreno leaned forward. That puts him inside her vehicle. Yes, Harper said quietly. But we still need to prove why. Because a fingerprint alone didn't automatically prove murder. Turner could claim he had ridden in her car at some point. Maybe fix something. Maybe she gave him a ride. After 17 years, memories could blur. But Harper knew something Turner didn't. The fingerprint had been lifted from the inside of the driver's door. Exactly where someone's thumb might press while opening the door from inside the vehicle. Meaning whoever left that print had likely been sitting in the driver's seat. Driving Emily Carson's car. Moreno looked at him. You were right. Harper didn't feel satisfaction. Only a quiet, grim certainty. Because if Turner had been inside that car, then the night Emily Carson disappeared was no longer a mystery. It was a crime scene. And somewhere out there, the man responsible had been living his life for nearly 2 decades. Moreno closed the file. We need to find him. Harper already knew where to start. The public records search he ran weeks earlier had shown Turner living in a small southern Oregon town called Redvale. 2 hours away. Working at another repair shop. Same profession. Same quiet life. But this time, detectives wouldn't be asking casual questions. This time they would arrive with evidence. And if Harper's instincts were right, Michael Turner had been carrying a secret since the night rain fell over Ashwood in 1998. A secret buried for 17 years. But not buried deep enough. The road to Redvale stretched south through miles of dark evergreen forest, the same endless landscape that had swallowed so many unanswered questions the night Emily Carson disappeared. Daniel Harper drove in silence, the hum of the highway beneath his tires mixing with the steady rhythm of rain beginning to fall again against the windshield. 17 years. For 17 years, Michael Turner had lived his life like any other man. Worked jobs. Paid rent. Talked to neighbors. Walked into grocery stores under bright fluorescent lights where no one had the faintest idea that his fingerprint might be sitting quietly inside a cold case file. Now that fingerprint had resurfaced. And the quiet life he built was about to crack open. Detective Lisa Moreno followed behind Harper in an unmarked police SUV, the distance between the vehicles barely 3 car lengths as they left the outskirts of Ashwood behind. Neither of them had said much since the lab report confirmed the match, because both detectives understood something important. Finding Turner was only the beginning. A fingerprint inside the car proved he had been there, but it didn't explain what happened to Emily Carson. Without a body, without a witness, without a confession, the case still lived in a dangerous gray area where defense attorneys thrived. But Harper had seen enough interrogations to recognize when pressure could break someone. And after nearly 2 decades, Michael Turner might not be ready for that pressure anymore. Redvale appeared slowly out of the forest, a small town of weathered storefronts and narrow streets tucked beside a winding river. Population just under 4,000. The kind of place where people noticed unfamiliar cars. Moreno's voice crackled softly over the radio between them. Repair shops 2 blocks ahead. Harper slowed his car as they passed a faded sign reading Turner Auto Service. The building looked older than the town itself. Corrugated metal siding, wide garage doors half open, the smell of oil and engine exhaust drifting into the cold afternoon air. Inside, a man stood bent over the hood of a pickup truck. Even from the street, Harper recognized him immediately. Older now, heavier in the shoulders. Hair thinner and streaked with gray. But it was Michael Turner. Alive. Standing less than 50 feet away from the detectives who had just reopened the darkest chapter of his past. Harper parked along the curb and stepped out slowly. Moreno did the same behind him. For a moment, neither detective moved. Inside the garage, Turner wiped his hands with a rag and turned toward the street, perhaps noticing the unfamiliar vehicles. His eyes locked onto Harper, and something subtle happened. A flicker. Not panic. Not shock. But recognition. Turner had seen Harper before. 17 years earlier, in a small interview room inside the Ashwood Police Department. Harper walked forward calmly, each step echoing softly across the wet pavement. Turner set the rag down on a nearby toolbox. "Afternoon," he said. His voice sounded steady. Harper studied him carefully. "Michael Turner." Turner nodded. "That's me." Moreno stood slightly behind Harper, watching every movement. Harper spoke quietly. "We're with the Ashwood Police Department." For a fraction of a second, the mechanic's posture changed. It was subtle, barely visible, but Harper noticed the slight tightening of Turner's jaw. Ashwood. The town he left years ago. The town where Emily Carson disappeared. Turner folded his arms slowly across his chest. "That's a long way to drive," he said. Harper didn't respond to the comment. Instead, he pulled a thin folder from beneath his jacket. Inside was a copy of the fingerprint report. He held it up. "Your fingerprint was found inside Emily Carson's car." The air inside the garage seemed to freeze. Turner didn't move. Moreno watched his face carefully, looking for any sign of surprise. But the mechanic's expression remained controlled. Too controlled. Harper continued. "The print was lifted from the driver's door." Still nothing. Then Turner shrugged slightly. "I worked on a lot of cars back then." Harper expected that answer. "I'm sure you did." Turner leaned casually against the truck beside him. "Maybe she brought it in. Maybe I checked something under the hood. I don't remember every customer from 20 years ago." Harper nodded slowly. That explanation might sound reasonable to someone unfamiliar with the case. But Harper knew something Turner didn't. Emily Carson's car had never been serviced at Turner's shop. Not once. Harper took another step forward. "She never brought her car here." Turner didn't respond immediately. The rain outside the garage grew heavier, tapping against the metal roof like distant static. Moreno could see the tension building beneath Turner's calm exterior. The mechanic shifted his weight slightly. "Well," he said, "maybe I looked at it somewhere else. Maybe she asked for help with something." Harper watched his eyes carefully. "They didn't know each other," Moreno said suddenly. Turner glanced toward her. Moreno continued. "Emily Carson's friends say she didn't know you. Never mentioned you." The silence that followed stretched long and uncomfortable. Turner looked back toward Harper. "So, what is this?" he asked. "You two drove all this way because of a fingerprint from 20 years ago?" Harper's voice remained calm. "No." He slid another photograph from the folder and held it up. The image showed Emily's abandoned silver sedan sitting in the fog beside Mill Creek Park. Driver's door open. Interior light glowing. "The driver's seat was pushed back when police found the car," Harper said. Turner said nothing. "Emily was 5'3", Harper continued. "She kept the seat far forward." Another pause. "The person who drove that car to the park was taller than she was." Turner's eyes narrowed slightly. "And your fingerprint," Harper finished quietly, "was on the driver's door." The mechanic straightened slowly. For the first time since the detectives arrived, the calm mask on his face began to crack. Just a little, but enough. Turner wiped his hands again with the rag, buying himself a few seconds. "You're making a lot of assumptions," he said. Harper nodded. "Which is why we'd like you to come down to the station and talk." Turner looked toward the open garage door where rain now poured steadily onto the pavement outside. "You got a warrant?" Moreno answered. "Not yet." Turner smiled slightly. "Then I think I'll stay here." Harper studied him carefully. For years he had watched suspects hide behind confidence, believing time had erased the evidence against them. But time also had another effect. Memories faded. Stories changed. People made mistakes. Harper slipped the photograph back into the folder. "That's fine," he said quietly. Turner's smile widened slightly. "But we will get one." The smile faded. "And when we do," Harper continued, "we'll start asking a lot more questions." Turner said nothing. The detectives turned and walked back toward their vehicles. Behind them, the mechanic stood in the garage doorway watching. Not waving, not speaking, just watching. As Harper climbed into his car, Moreno leaned through the window. "You saw that, right?" Harper nodded. Turner hadn't looked surprised when they mentioned Emily Carson. He hadn't asked what happened to her. He hadn't said he hoped she was found. Instead, he had gone straight to explanations. Straight to defenses. Like a man who had already spent years thinking about exactly what he would say if anyone ever asked again. Harper started the engine. Rain streaked across the windshield as the car pulled away from Turner Auto Service. Moreno followed close behind. In the rearview mirror, Harper could still see the mechanic standing in the garage doorway. A small figure slowly fading in the rain. 17 years earlier, a young teacher vanished from Ashwood without a trace. Now the man whose fingerprint sat inside her abandoned car had finally been forced to face the past. But Harper knew something else too. Michael Turner wasn't just nervous. He was afraid. And fear had a way of making people do things they hadn't planned. Things that could finally reveal the truth buried beneath 17 years of silence. Rain followed the detectives all the way back from Redvale, a steady gray curtain falling across the highway as Daniel Harper drove north toward Ashwood. The windshield wipers moved in a slow, rhythmic sweep, but Harper barely noticed them. His mind remained fixed on one thing, the look on Michael Turner's face when the fingerprint report appeared. It hadn't been surprise. It had been calculation. The kind of silent mental shift that happens when a person suddenly realizes the past they thought was buried might still be breathing somewhere beneath the ground. Detective Lisa Moreno's voice came through the radio. "You think he's going to run?" Harper didn't answer immediately. He watched the long stretch of road disappearing into mist ahead of them. "Maybe," he said finally. Because criminals who carried secrets for years often built their lives around the belief that those secrets would never surface again. When that belief shattered, panic followed. And panic created mistakes. By the time they reached Ashwood, the plan was already forming. If Turner had been inside Emily Carson's car, then the investigation needed to expand far beyond a single fingerprint. Detectives would have to rebuild the entire timeline of the night she disappeared, this time with Michael Turner placed directly inside it. The first step came quickly. A warrant request. Moreno worked late into the evening compiling the evidence needed to convince a judge that Michael Turner's property might contain items connected to the disappearance of Emily Carson. The fingerprint match. The proximity of his home to Emily's apartment in 1998. The witness who saw a dark pickup truck leaving her street late that night. Individually, each detail might have seemed weak. Together, they formed a pattern that had never been fully examined before. At 9:42 p.m., the judge approved the search warrant. The following morning, 3 vehicles from the Ashwood Police Department rolled quietly into Redvale just after sunrise. The small town was barely awake. A few early commuters moved through the streets, headlights cutting through the pale morning fog drifting along the riverbank. Turner's house sat at the end of a narrow gravel road lined with tall cedar trees. A modest single-story building with peeling white paint and a rusting mailbox leaning slightly toward the ditch. Moreno stepped out of the lead vehicle and approached the front door. Harper stood just behind her. She knocked. Once. Twice. No answer. Moreno tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. Harper glanced toward the driveway. Turner's pickup truck sat parked beside the house, which meant he was probably inside. Moreno nodded to another officer standing nearby. The man stepped forward and called out loudly. "Michael Turner, Ashwood Police Department. We have a search warrant." For several seconds the house remained silent. Then footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the floor inside. The door opened. Turner stood there wearing a plain gray shirt and jeans, his expression tight but controlled. "You're early," he said. Moreno held up the warrant. "We're conducting a search of the property." Turner glanced at the document briefly, then stepped aside without a word. The officers entered. Inside, the house looked exactly like the life of a man who lived alone for years. Sparse furniture, a television sitting across from a worn couch, A small kitchen with dishes stacked neatly beside the sink. Nothing immediately suspicious. But cold cases rarely solve themselves through obvious clues. They unraveled slowly, room by room, drawer by drawer. Two officers moved toward the back of the house while Moreno and Harper remained in the living room with Turner. The mechanic sat in a chair near the window, arms folded across his chest. "You know," he said calmly, "this is a pretty big step for something that happened 20 years ago." Harper said nothing. Turner continued. "People touch other people's cars all the time." Moreno leaned against the wall. "Not usually the driver's door." Turner shrugged. "Maybe I helped her start it one day." "Did you know her?" Moreno asked. Turner hesitated, then shook his head. "Not really." Harper watched him carefully. The story was already changing. Back in 1998, Turner claimed he didn't know Emily Carson at all. Now suddenly, there was the possibility he had helped her start the car. Small adjustments. The kind suspects made when old lies collided with new evidence. Footsteps approached from a hallway. One of the officers appeared holding a cardboard box. "Found this in the bedroom closet." The box looked old. Dust coated the top. Moreno opened it slowly. Inside were dozens of small items, receipts, old photographs, documents from various jobs Turner had held over the years. Nothing immediately alarming. Then Harper noticed something near the bottom of the box. A thin leather wallet. He lifted it carefully. Inside were several faded cards. A driver's license. A library card. A grocery store membership. The name printed on each card stopped the room cold. Emily Carson. Moreno looked up slowly. Turner's face had gone pale. For a long moment no one spoke. Harper held the wallet in the air. "You said you didn't know her." Turner stared at the floor. His jaw tightened. "I didn't," he said quietly. Moreno stepped closer. "Then why do you have her wallet?" The mechanic swallowed. No answer. The silence inside the room thickened. Harper opened the wallet again, examining the contents. Emily's old Oregon driver's license photo stared back at him, the same gentle smile printed on thousands of missing person flyers 17 years earlier. Her credit cards were still inside, expired long ago, which meant the wallet had never been used. It had simply been kept, hidden in a closet for nearly 2 decades. Moreno's voice dropped to a low, controlled tone.
"Michael," she said.
He didn't look up. "You need to start talking." Turner shook his head slowly. "I want a lawyer." Harper closed the wallet and placed it back into the evidence bag. That single discovery had just changed everything. The fingerprint placed Turner inside Emily's car. But the wallet placed Emily inside Turner's life after she disappeared. And there was only one logical explanation for that. Harper spoke quietly. "You didn't just touch her car." Turner remained silent. "You were with her that night." Still nothing. Outside, the wind moved softly through the cedar trees, carrying the faint smell of rain across the yard. Inside the house, the past that Michael Turner had hidden for 17 years was finally beginning to surface piece by piece. But Harper knew something else. The wallet was only the beginning, because people who kept souvenirs from their crimes rarely kept just one. The moment Emily Carson's wallet appeared in Michael Turner's closet, the atmosphere inside the small house shifted completely. What had begun as a cautious search for possible evidence now carried the unmistakable weight of something darker. Detectives weren't looking for a connection anymore. They had found one. Turner sat in the chair near the window, shoulders rigid, eyes fixed on the floor as officers continued moving through the house. The quiet clatter of drawers opening and closing echoed through the narrow hallway. For 17 years, the disappearance of Emily Carson had been a mystery without direction, a question without a suspect. Now the suspect was sitting only a few feet away, and pieces of the past were starting to surface. Harper placed the wallet carefully inside an evidence bag and set it on the table. Even through the plastic, the worn leather seemed heavy with meaning. Emily Carson's driver's license photo stared out from inside, her eyes frozen in a moment from 1998, a life interrupted without warning. Moreno watched Turner closely. "You kept it all this time," she said quietly. The mechanic didn't respond. His hands were clenched tightly together now, the calm composure he showed the day before slowly eroding under the weight of the search happening around him. An officer stepped into the living room from the hallway. "Detective," he said. Moreno turned. "Yeah, you're going to want to see this." Harper followed them toward the back of the house. The bedroom was small, barely large enough for a narrow bed and a dresser pushed against the wall. The closet door stood open, clothing pulled aside during the search. But the officer wasn't pointing toward the closet anymore. He was pointing at the floor. A section of carpet near the foot of the bed had been rolled back. Underneath, a square piece of plywood had been cut into the wooden floorboards. A hidden compartment. Moreno crouched slowly. "You find it open like that?" The officer nodded. "It was nailed down. We pried it loose." Harper stepped closer. Inside the compartment sat another container, a small metal box, the kind people sometimes used for storing documents or valuables. Moreno opened it carefully. Inside were several objects wrapped in cloth. For a moment no one moved. Then she lifted the first item free. A wristwatch. Small. Delicate. The kind often worn by women. Harper leaned closer. The back of the watch had a tiny engraved inscription. "To Emily, love Mom and Dad." Moreno exhaled slowly. 17 years. Another piece of Emily Carson's life hidden inside Michael Turner's house. Turner's breathing had changed now. Faster. Uneven. The calm mechanic from the repair shop was fading quickly, replaced by someone struggling to hold himself together. Moreno lifted another cloth bundle from the box. Inside was a necklace. Then a ring. None of the items looked particularly valuable, but they were personal, intimate, things a person carried every day, things that disappeared with Emily Carson the night she vanished. Harper felt the weight of the moment settle over him. For years the case had been built on speculation. Now physical evidence was sitting in front of them, evidence that should never have been inside Michael Turner's home. Moreno closed the metal box slowly and stood. "Michael," she called from the doorway. Turner looked up. His face had lost all color. She held the wristwatch up in front of him. "Do you recognize this?" The mechanic stared at it.
For a long time, he said nothing.
Then he shook his head weakly.
"No."
Moreno's voice hardened. "Your name is not engraved on the back of it." Turner swallowed. "I've never seen that before." Harper stepped forward and placed the evidence bag containing Emily's wallet beside the watch. "You've never seen this either?" Turner's eyes darted briefly toward the bag, then away. Silence filled the room. Moreno folded her arms. "Both of these were hidden under your floor." Turner rubbed his hands together nervously. "I don't know how they got there." Harper studied him carefully. Over decades of interrogation work, he had seen this moment many times. The moment when the wall of denial began to crack under the pressure of reality. Turner's story was collapsing.
And he knew it.
But even now he wasn't ready to admit anything. Moreno leaned closer. "Michael," she said quietly, "you kept her things." Turner shook his head again.
"No."
Harper spoke calmly. "Why?" The single word hung in the air. Turner looked up sharply. "I didn't do anything," he said quickly. Moreno didn't raise her voice. "Then explain why Emily Carson's wallet and jewelry were hidden under your bedroom floor." Turner's breathing grew louder. "I don't know," he repeated. Harper could see sweat forming along the mechanic's forehead. 17 years was a long time to carry a secret. But secrets rarely survived when the physical evidence appeared in front of them. Moreno straightened. "Michael Turner," she said clearly, "you are under arrest in connection with the disappearance of Emily Carson." The words seemed to drain the remaining strength from his posture. Turner didn't resist when officers stepped forward and placed handcuffs around his wrists. The metal clicked softly in the quiet room. Outside, the wind rustled through the tall cedar trees surrounding the house. Another officer sealed the metal box containing Emily's belongings and carried it toward the front door. Harper remained standing in the bedroom for a moment longer. His eyes moved slowly across the room. The hidden compartment, the loose floorboards, The bed where Turner had slept for years, just inches above the place where he had hidden the possessions of a woman who vanished without explanation. It wasn't just evidence. It was something darker. A reminder. A trophy. The kind killers sometimes kept to relive a moment only they fully understood. Moreno stepped into the doorway beside him. "He's not talking," she said quietly. Harper nodded.
He will.
Because now the case had something it never had before. A suspect in custody. Physical evidence linking him directly to the victim. And a timeline waiting to be rebuilt piece by piece. But one question still lingered beneath everything else. The same question that haunted Ashwood since the morning Emily Carson's car was found abandoned beside the fog-covered woods. What happened to her? The answer had been hidden for 17 years. Now the man who likely knew the truth was sitting in the back of a police vehicle outside. And for the first time since 1998, the silence surrounding Emily Carson's disappearance was finally beginning to break. The drive back to Ashwood felt longer than the trip down to Redvale. The rain had faded into a dull gray mist hanging low over the highway, blurring the edges of the forest as the police vehicles moved north through the quiet Oregon countryside. In the back seat of the lead car, Michael Turner sat with his hands cuffed in front of him, staring out the window without speaking. 17 years earlier, a young teacher vanished without explanation. Now the man whose fingerprint sat inside her abandoned car, the man who kept her wallet and jewelry hidden beneath his bedroom floor, was riding silently toward the same police station where he had once calmly told investigators he knew nothing about her. Detective Lisa, Moreno glanced at him through the rear-view mirror. Turner hadn't said a single word since the moment the handcuffs closed around his wrists. No questions.
No anger.
No denial. Just silence. Sometimes suspects talked too much when they felt pressure. They rushed to explain things that didn't make sense. They tried to fill the empty space with words. But sometimes the opposite happened. They shut down completely. And silence could be just as revealing. Daniel Harper drove the second vehicle behind them, watching the flashing red brake lights ahead through the mist. He had spent decades inside interrogation rooms, sitting across from people who carried secrets they believed would never come to light. What he knew was this: the first few hours after an arrest often mattered the most. Because the shock of being caught hadn't fully settled yet. The suspect was still trying to process the collapse of the life they had built around their hidden crime.
Turner was in that moment now.
And Harper intended to use it. By the time the convoy reached Ashwood, evening had begun to settle across the small town. Streetlights flickered on a long main street, casting pale yellow circles across wet pavement as the vehicles pulled into the parking lot behind the police department. Inside the building, the atmosphere had changed. Word had already spread among the officers. The Emily Carson case, the cold case that haunted Ashwood for nearly 2 decades, was suddenly alive again. Turner was escorted down a narrow hallway toward an interview room. The same kind of room where Harper had spoken to him 17 years earlier. A metal table. 2 chairs. Plain gray walls. No windows. Moreno placed the evidence bag containing Emily's wallet on the table before sitting down across from him. Harper stood quietly near the wall. Turner stared at the bag. For the first time since his arrest, his expression shifted slightly. Not panic. Not fear. Something closer to resignation. Moreno began calmly. "Michael, we found Emily Carson's wallet in your closet." No response. "And we found her watch and jewelry hidden under your bedroom floor." Turner's eyes remained fixed on the table. Harper stepped forward slowly. "Your fingerprint was inside her car." Still nothing. Moreno leaned forward. "That's 3 pieces of evidence tying you to her disappearance." Turner finally looked up. His voice was low. "I want a lawyer." Moreno expected that. And legally, once the request was made clearly, questioning had to stop. But Harper knew something else. Sometimes suspects spoke anyway. Not answering questions directly.
Just talking.
Turner's eyes drifted toward the evidence bag again. "I didn't kill anyone," he said quietly. Moreno exchanged a quick glance with Harper. That sentence was important. Because until that moment, neither detective had actually accused him of murder. Only of involvement in Emily Carson's disappearance. Yet Turner had jumped straight to the word kill. Harper spoke carefully. "We didn't say you did." Turner rubbed his hands together slowly. The handcuffs made the movement awkward. His voice remained barely above a whisper. "She was alive when I left her." Moreno felt a chill move through the room. There it was. Not a confession, but the first crack in the wall. Harper kept his tone steady. "Left her where?" Turner's eyes widened slightly, realizing what he had just said. He leaned back in the chair. "I'm done talking." The silence returned. But the damage had already been done. "She was alive when I left her." That single sentence changed the entire shape of the investigation, because it meant Turner knew something no innocent person should know. He knew Emily Carson had been alive at some point after they encountered each other, which meant he had seen her that night. Harper picked up the evidence bag slowly. "You kept her things for 17 years, he said. Turner stared at the floor again. "Why?" No answer. Moreno tried a different angle. "Michael, people make mistakes. Things happen in ways they didn't plan." Turner's jaw tightened. "If something happened that night," she continued, "this is your chance to explain it." Still nothing. Harper knew the silence wasn't empty. Turner's mind was racing, trying to decide what story, if any, could survive the evidence now stacked against him. The fingerprint, the wallet, the jewelry hidden beneath the floor, and the statement he just made. "She was alive when I left her." Harper stepped closer. "You moved her car to the park." Turner didn't react. "You staged the scene," Harper continued. Still silence. "You hoped we'd think she wandered into the woods." Turner's breathing had become shallow now. Harper leaned forward slightly. But something went wrong. The mechanic's eyes flickered upward for a brief moment. Just a fraction of a second. But Harper saw it. And that tiny reaction told him more than any words could. Something had gone wrong that night. Moreno sat back in her chair. "We're going to keep looking, Michael." Turner remained silent. "Your house," she continued. "Your truck. Anywhere you've lived since 1998. She gestured toward the evidence bag. "And every item connected to Emily Carson." Harper added quietly. "And eventually we're going to find where you left her." The room fell silent again. Turner stared at the metal table as if the surface might open and swallow him whole. Because the truth he had hidden for 17 years was no longer buried. It was circling closer with every piece of evidence uncovered. Outside the interview room, officers moved quickly through the station hallway preparing the next stage of the investigation. Search teams. Forensic analysis. Old property records. Every place Michael Turner had lived since leaving Ashwood. Somewhere in the forests, fields, or rivers of Oregon, the final piece of Emily Carson's story might still be waiting. And the man who knew where it was had just admitted something critical. He had seen her alive that night. Which meant the end of this cold case, the answer that haunted Ashwood for nearly 2 decades, might finally be within reach. But only if Michael Turner's silence could be broken. The interview room fell silent after Michael Turner's last words. The fluorescent light above the table buzzed faintly, filling the empty space where conversation had just collapsed. Turner leaned back in the chair, eyes fixed on the floor again, his earlier slip hanging in the air like a shadow that refused to disappear. "She was alive when I left her." For 17 years, the Emily Carson case had lived in uncertainty. Now, with that single sentence, the mystery had shifted. The man sitting in front of them knew something. More than something. He knew part of the story investigators had been chasing through rain-soaked forests and abandoned leads since 1998. But Turner had closed his mouth again. And legally, once he asked for a lawyer, the detectives couldn't push him any further. Moreno gathered the evidence bag and stood. "We're done for now," she said calmly. Turner didn't look up. The door opened. An officer stepped inside and escorted the mechanic down the hallway toward a holding cell. Harper remained in the empty interview room for a moment longer. 17 years earlier, he had sat in a nearly identical room asking Michael Turner if he knew Emily Carson. Back then, the mechanic had calmly said no. Now the truth was beginning to leak through the cracks. But Harper knew something important. Confessions were unpredictable. Sometimes suspects talked immediately once the pressure began. Other times they stayed silent until overwhelming evidence left them nowhere to hide, which meant the investigation had to move forward as if Turner might never speak again. Because the real goal wasn't a confession. It was the truth. And the truth needed proof. Down the hallway, Moreno had already gathered several officers around a table covered in maps and documents. Property records, satellite images, and old addresses Turner had lived at since leaving Ashwood were spread across the surface. Harper stepped into the room. Moreno looked up. Harper nodded. Expected that. She tapped the map. We're building a search list. Because if Turner had kept Emily Carson's personal belongings hidden beneath his bedroom floor for nearly 2 decades, there was a strong possibility something else existed somewhere else. Something bigger. Something investigators had been searching for since the day the abandoned silver sedan appeared beside Mill Creek Park. A body. Without one, prosecutors often faced an uphill battle in homicide cases. But with the physical evidence already discovered, the pressure to locate Emily Carson's remains had become urgent. Moreno pointed toward a location marked about 15 miles outside Ashwood. Turner lived here for 3 years after the case went cold. A small rural property, surrounded by thick forest. Another address appeared farther south near Redvale. And this one, she continued, he rented a cabin here around 2005. Harper studied the map carefully. Oregon's landscape was vast. Endless miles of dense woods, rivers, abandoned logging roads, and empty farmland where something buried could remain hidden for decades. If Turner had moved Emily Carson's body after staging the car at the park, he could have taken her almost anywhere, which meant search teams had to think carefully. They needed patterns. Places Turner knew well. Places he could reach quickly in the middle of the night without drawing attention. Moreno looked up. Mill Creek Park is only 6 miles from his old house. Harper nodded slowly, which means wherever he took her it probably wasn't far. Because criminals often made simple decisions under pressure. They didn't drive hundreds of miles while carrying evidence. They went somewhere familiar. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere hidden. Moreno pointed at a narrow area north of the park. A lot of logging roads here. Harper leaned closer to the map. The forest around Ashwood was full of them. Narrow dirt paths used decades earlier by timber crews and mostly abandoned since. Many were barely visible now. Some had completely disappeared beneath overgrown vegetation. Perfect places for something to vanish. Moreno circled the area with a pen. We start here. The following morning, search teams moved into the forest. Officers, volunteers, and forensic specialists spread across miles of dense woodland carrying GPS equipment, ground-penetrating radar, and trained search dogs. The air was cold and damp beneath the tall pine trees. Fallen needles covered the ground like a soft carpet, muffling footsteps as teams moved slowly through the terrain. Harper stood near the edge of the search zone watching the operation begin. 17 years earlier, dozens of volunteers had walked through similar woods shouting Emily Carson's name into the fog. Back then, they believed she might still be alive somewhere. Lost. Injured. Waiting to be found. Now the search carried a different weight. No one expected to find her alive. But finding her at all would finally bring an end to the mystery that haunted Ashwood since the morning her car appeared abandoned beside the park. Hours passed. Search teams moved methodically through the forest grid. Dogs followed faint scents. Officers marked unusual ground disturbances and checked shallow depressions in the earth. Most turned out to be nothing. Animal burrows. Old tree roots. Natural erosion. But near mid-afternoon, one of the search dogs suddenly stopped near the edge of a narrow clearing. The handler raised a hand immediately. The dog began pawing lightly at the ground. Harper and Moreno moved closer. The clearing sat beside an old logging road barely visible beneath thick undergrowth. Moss covered most of the path, but faint tire tracks from years earlier still formed shallow ruts in the dirt. The dog barked sharply. Then again. Moreno crouched near the spot where the animal was focused. The soil looked slightly uneven compared to the surrounding ground, as if something had once disturbed it. Harper felt a quiet tension build in his chest. 17 years of searching. 17 years of questions. And now a dog was digging into the forest floor just a few miles from where Emily Carson's car had been found. The handler pulled the animal back gently. Forensic technicians stepped forward with shovels.
Carefully. Slowly.
The first few inches revealed nothing but damp earth and roots. Then the shovel struck something harder. Not stone. Something hollow. The technician knelt down and brushed the soil away with gloved hands.
White. Smooth. Curved. Bone.
Moreno exhaled softly. Harper closed his eyes for a moment. Because the search for Emily Carson had just reached the place investigators feared all along. 17 years after she vanished into the darkness of an Oregon night, the forest was finally beginning to give her back. And somewhere inside the police station behind them, the man who said she was alive when he left her was sitting alone in a cell. Knowing that the ground was no longer keeping his secret, the forest grew quiet as the first bone emerged from the soil. Search teams stopped moving. Conversations faded. Even the wind drifting through the tall Oregon pines seemed to slow, as if the woods themselves understood the gravity of what was happening beneath their shadows. For 17 years, the disappearance of Emily Carson had been a mystery suspended in uncertainty. Now the ground beneath an old logging road was beginning to answer the question that haunted Ashwood since the autumn of 1998. What happened to her? The forensic technician brushed more soil away with careful strokes of a small tool. The bone fragment widened into something unmistakable, part of a human forearm. Moreno stood nearby, her hands resting on her hips as she watched the excavation continue. No one spoke. Daniel Harper remained just outside the clearing. He had been to many crime scenes during his career, more than he could ever count, but something about this one carried a different weight. Maybe it was the years that passed. Maybe it was the quiet persistence that brought the investigation back to life. Or maybe it was the simple fact that for nearly 2 decades, Emily Carson's family had lived without knowing where she was. Now the answer was emerging piece by piece beneath a layer of forest soil. Within an hour, the excavation widened. More bones appeared. A section of rib. Part of a skull. Fragments of clothing preserved by the damp earth. The remains were incomplete, scattered slightly by years of shifting soil and animal activity, but the arrangement made one thing clear. Someone had buried a body here.
Not deeply.
Just enough to hide it. A shallow grave beside a forgotten logging road. Moreno stepped closer as technicians worked carefully around the remains. "Any personal items?" she asked. One of the forensic specialists shook his head. Not yet. But Harper already knew what that meant. Michael Turner had kept Emily Carson's belongings, her wallet, her watch, her jewelry, hidden in his house, which meant those items were never buried with her. They had been taken.
Kept.
As reminders. The Discovery team marked the area with bright flags and began documenting every inch of the scene. Photographs, measurements, soil samples. The careful, methodical process that turned a patch of forest into a courtroom story. As the sun dipped lower through the trees, a technician lifted a final bone fragment from the earth. The skull, cracked along one side. Harper felt a cold weight settle in his chest. The fracture wasn't subtle. It was severe. Moreno noticed it too. "That's not natural damage," she said quietly. The technician nodded. "Looks like blunt force trauma." The words carried a grim clarity. Emily Carson hadn't simply vanished into the woods. She had been killed. And someone had taken the time to bury her body just far enough from town that no one searching those early days would ever think to look there. Except now they had. Because the man who placed her there had left traces behind. A fingerprint inside her car. Her wallet hidden in his closet. Her watch beneath his bedroom floor. And a sentence he never should have spoken. "She was alive when I left her." As darkness settled across the forest, the remains were carefully sealed in evidence containers and transported to the medical examiner's office. Back at the Ashwood Police Department, Michael Turner sat alone inside a holding cell. He had been there most of the day. No television. No conversation. Just the dull echo of footsteps in the hallway outside and the slow ticking of time. When Moreno and Harper returned to the station late that evening, the atmosphere inside had changed again. Officers spoke quietly among themselves. Everyone knew what the search team had found. Harper walked past the cell block corridor and stopped outside Turner's cell. The mechanic sat on the narrow bench, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the floor. For a moment Harper said nothing. Then he spoke quietly through the bars. "We found her." Turner's shoulders stiffened, but he didn't look up. Harper continued. "In the woods north of Mill Creek Park." Still silence. The skull was fractured. Turner slowly lifted his head. His eyes were darker now, tired, but still guarded. Harper watched him carefully. Someone struck her. The mechanic's gaze drifted toward the concrete floor again. Moreno stepped beside Harper. "The forensic team will confirm the identity soon," she said. "But we both know who it is." Turner's jaw tightened. Neither detective mentioned the grave directly.
They didn't need to.
Because if Michael Turner had buried Emily Carson in that forest 17 years ago, then he knew exactly what investigators had uncovered. Harper leaned slightly closer to the bars. Turner remained silent. "But that injury says otherwise." Still nothing. Moreno crossed her arms. "You had 17 years to think about this," she said. "You had 17 years to decide what story you were going to tell if someone ever came asking again." Turner finally spoke. His voice was quiet. "I told you I want a lawyer." Harper nodded slowly. "That's your right." He stepped back from the cell. "But the story's almost complete now." Turner looked up again. Harper's voice remained calm. "We have your fingerprint in her car. We have her belongings in your house. And now we have her body buried near a road you drove every day." The mechanic's breathing grew heavier, because he understood what those pieces meant. The silence surrounding Emily Carson's disappearance was collapsing. And the truth, the one he buried in the forest 17 years earlier, was no longer hidden beneath the soil. Moreno turned toward the hallway. "Medical examiner will finish the analysis tomorrow." Harper nodded. Then he looked back at Turner one last time. "For 17 years, he said quietly, you lived like nothing happened." Turner didn't answer. Harper's voice softened slightly. "But Emily Carson never got that chance." The detectives walked away from the cell block. Behind them, Michael Turner remained sitting on the bench in silence. For nearly 2 decades, he had carried a secret that only the forest knew. Now the forest had given it back. And the final chapter of the cold case that haunted Ashwood was about to begin. Morning arrived slowly over Ashwood, the sky pale and heavy with clouds drifting low across the Oregon hills. Inside the medical examiner's office, bright fluorescent lights replaced the quiet darkness of the forest where Emily Carson had spent 17 years hidden beneath the soil. The remains recovered from the shallow grave lay carefully arranged on a stainless steel examination table. Forensic specialists moved with quiet precision, documenting every fragment, every fracture, every piece of evidence the earth had preserved. Detective Lisa Moreno stood behind the observation glass beside Daniel Harper. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The silence carried the weight of nearly 2 decades. When the medical examiner finally turned toward them, the answer was already written in the expression on his face. "It's her." The words came calmly, clinically, but they landed with the force of something much heavier. Dental records confirmed it. The remains recovered from the forest belonged to Emily Carson. 17 years after she vanished, the missing teacher from Ashwood had finally been found. Moreno exhaled slowly. Outside the examination room, investigators gathered around a table covered with reports and photographs taken at the burial site. The medical examiner stepped out moments later, removing his gloves as he approached. "There's no question about the cause of death," he said. Harper looked up. Blunt force trauma to the skull. The fracture discovered at the scene had been severe. A single powerful blow delivered to the left side of Emily's head. The damage was catastrophic, the kind of injury unlikely to be accidental. Moreno's voice was quiet. "1 strike." The examiner nodded. "Looks that way." A blunt object. Something heavy enough to shatter bone. Possibly a tire iron, a wrench, even a rock. The exact weapon might never be found, but the injury itself told a clear story. Emily Carson hadn't wandered into the forest. She hadn't gotten lost in the rain that night. Someone had killed her and buried her beside an abandoned logging road where no one would ever think to look. Until now. Harper stared down at the photographs from the excavation site. The shallow grave, the exposed bones, the surrounding trees that had grown silently taller year after year while the town of Ashwood tried to forget the mystery buried beneath them. But the town never fully forgot. Every October, Emily Carson's disappearance returned quietly to local conversation. The cold case that never found an answer. Now it finally had one. Later that afternoon, Harper and Moreno walked back toward the cell block. Michael Turner was waiting. The mechanic sat in the same position as the night before, elbows resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the floor. When the detectives approached the bars, he looked up slowly. Harper spoke first. The remains were identified. Turner said nothing. Moreno added the words he already knew were coming. It was Emily. The mechanic's eyes closed briefly. Just for a second. Then he opened them again. Harper watched him carefully. Cause of death was blunt force trauma. Turner's jaw tightened. You struck her. Silence. Moreno stepped forward. The evidence is overwhelming now. Turner looked away. For the first time since his arrest, his voice sounded strained. I didn't mean to. The words barely escaped his mouth. Harper didn't react outwardly. But inside the hallway, several officers nearby turned their heads. Because after nearly 20 years of silence, Michael Turner had just begun to confess. Moreno kept her tone steady. What happened? Turner stared at the concrete floor again. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Harper leaned against the bars. Then tell us how it happened. The mechanic rubbed his face with both hands. His shoulders sagged slightly. For years he had carried the memory alone. Now the pressure was finally breaking it open. I saw her walking to her car, he said quietly. Moreno and Harper exchanged a glance. The timeline was beginning to form. Turner continued slowly, as if replaying the night in his mind. She was leaving her apartment. It was raining. October 1998. Cold drizzle falling across Ashwood. The same weather Harper remembered from the morning Emily Carson's car was discovered beside the park. I followed her, Turner said. Harper's voice remained calm. Why? Turner hesitated, then answered. I just wanted to talk. Moreno didn't respond to that. Instead, she asked the next question. What happened when you reached the car? Turner swallowed. She tried to leave. Harper could see the tension building in his face. She didn't know who I was, Turner said. Moreno spoke quietly. So, you forced her into the passenger seat. Turner nodded slightly. The room fell silent again. Harper continued the story aloud, as if laying the pieces on the table. You drove her car. Turner nodded again. To Mill Creek Park. Yes. The same park where the abandoned sedan was found the next morning. Moreno folded her arms. What happened there? Turner's breathing grew heavier. She started screaming. Harper waited. I panicked, Turner said. The words came faster now. I told her to stop, but she kept screaming. Moreno's voice cut through the air. And you hit her. Turner looked down at his hands. I grabbed the tire iron from the back seat. The image was sudden and brutal. A frightened woman in a dark parking area beside the woods. Rain falling through the trees. A desperate moment turning violent. I only hit her once, Turner whispered. The confession hung in the air. For 17 years, the town of Ashwood had wondered what happened to Emily Carson after she disappeared into the darkness. Now the answer was finally spoken aloud inside a quiet police station hallway. Turner continued. She stopped moving. Harper closed his eyes briefly, because the final piece of the cold case had just fallen into place. Emily Carson hadn't vanished into the forest. She had died beside her own car on a rainy night in October 1998. And the man responsible had spent 17 years living freely while her family waited for answers. Now those answers were finally here. But the weight of them would echo through Ashwood for years to come. The confession didn't come in a dramatic rush. There was no sudden emotional collapse, no shouting, no tears spilling across the cold floor of the police station hallway. Instead, Michael Turner spoke the way many killers eventually do, slowly, quietly, as if each word weighed more than the last. For nearly 2 decades, he had carried the memory alone. Now the silence surrounding Emily Carson's death was finally breaking. Detective Lisa Moreno reopened the interview room, and Turner was escorted back inside. The same metal table, the same dull gray walls, the same fluorescent light buzzing faintly overhead. But this time the room felt different, because now the truth was sitting in the chair. A recorder was placed on the table. Moreno pressed the button. The red light blinked on. "State your name," she said calmly. "Michael Turner." Harper stood near the wall, arms folded, watching carefully. He had waited 17 years to hear the rest of his story. Moreno began. "Earlier you said you didn't mean to kill Emily Carson." Turner nodded slowly. "I didn't." His voice sounded tired now. The confident mechanic from the repair shop in Redvale had vanished completely. In his place sat a man who finally understood that the past had caught up with him. Moreno continued. "Tell us what happened after you hit her." Turner stared at the table. "She fell." The memory seemed to replay in his eyes as he spoke. She hit the ground beside the car. Rain falling through the trees. Mud forming beneath their feet. The empty parking lot at Mill Creek Park hidden beneath darkness. Harper pictured it clearly. The abandoned sedan found the next morning. Driver's door open. Interior light glowing faintly in the fog. Turner continued. "I thought she was unconscious." Moreno didn't interrupt. "I tried to wake her," he said. But the medical examiner's report told a different story. The blow had been fatal. Emily Carson likely died within minutes. Turner rubbed his face again. "I got scared." The words came out barely above a whisper. "So he moved her body, dragged her away from the car, into the trees." Harper could almost see the path in his mind. The wet ground, the dark forest swallowing the sound of movement, the distant hum of the town of Ashwood just a few miles away, while something terrible unfolded beneath the branches. Turner continued speaking. "I drove around for hours, trying to decide what to do, trying to find somewhere far enough away, somewhere quiet enough." Eventually, he reached the old logging road north of the park. The same place where search teams found the shallow grave 17 years later. "I buried her there," Turner said. Harper remained silent, because the story now matched the evidence perfectly. The location, the injury, the abandoned car staged at the park afterward. Turner described how he returned to Emily's sedan later that night, moved the seat back to drive it more comfortably, and left it at the park entrance hoping investigators would believe she had walked into the woods. "I thought the rain would wash everything away." In many ways, it had. The storm that night erased footprints, washed away tire marks, and buried the truth beneath layers of time. For years, the plan worked. The case faded into a cold file. Ashwood moved on. And Michael Turner quietly left town. Moreno asked the next question. "Why did you keep her belongings?" Turner hesitated. The answer came slowly. "I don't know." But Harper understood. Investigators had seen it before. Killers sometimes kept small personal items from their victims, a wallet, a watch, a ring. Not out of necessity, but as twisted reminders of the moment that changed everything. Souvenirs hidden in dark corners of their lives. For 17 years, Emily Carson's watch had rested beneath the floor of Turner's bedroom while the town she once lived in searched for answers. Moreno clicked off the recorder. The confession was complete. Outside the interview room, word spread quickly through the station. The cold case was over. 17 years of uncertainty had finally ended with a full admission of guilt. Later that evening, Michael Turner was formally charged with the murder of Emily Carson. News traveled through Ashwood almost instantly. Phones rang. Neighbors spoke quietly in grocery store aisles. Local reporters gathered outside the courthouse steps, where the story that once faded into silence had suddenly exploded back into public view. For many residents, the news brought a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that the truth was finally known. sadness for the life that had been taken so suddenly all those years ago. And for Emily Carson's family, the discovery brought something they had waited nearly 2 decades to hear. An answer. Not the answer they hoped for, but the truth. Days later, as winter rain fell once again across the small Oregon town, Daniel Harper stood quietly at the edge of Mill Creek Park. The same park where the silver sedan had been found in the fog on a cold morning in 1998. The parking lot looked almost unchanged. Tall trees surrounded the narrow road. Wind moved softly through the branches. For years Harper had returned to this place in his mind, replaying the unanswered questions that haunted the case. Why was the driver's seat pushed back? Who drove the car there? What happened to Emily Carson after she disappeared into the night? Now, every one of those questions had an answer. A retired detective's diary, the small notebook where Harper recorded his instincts and doubts, had helped reopen the investigation that finally uncovered the truth. He reached into his coat pocket and held the worn leather notebook for a moment. Inside it, one of the earliest entries still remained. A single line written 17 years earlier. Car seat moved. Someone else drove. The detail that never quite made sense. The detail that refused to leave his mind. In the end, that small observation helped unlock the entire mystery. Harper closed the notebook and looked toward the dark forest beyond the park. Somewhere beyond those trees, search teams had found the place where Emily Carson had been hidden for 17 years. A quiet patch of ground beside an old road where the truth had waited patiently beneath the soil. Cold cases often remain unsolved forever. Evidence fades. Witnesses disappear. Time erases the small details that once pointed toward the truth. But sometimes something small survives. A fingerprint. A forgotten memory. A line written inside an old detective's diary. And when those fragments finally come together, even the longest silence can break. 17 years after Emily Carson vanished from Ashwood, the mystery that haunted the town was finally over. But the echo of that rainy night in October 1998 would remain, a reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, sometimes finds its way back to the surface. In the weeks that followed Michael Turner's confession, Ashwood felt like a town slowly waking from a long, uneasy sleep. For 17 years, the name Emily Carson had existed in conversations as a question, a mystery people remembered but rarely spoke about in detail anymore. Now, the question had been replaced with something heavier. The truth. Local news vans parked outside the courthouse. Reporters stood in the cold Oregon air delivering updates to cameras while residents passed quietly on the sidewalk, sometimes stopping just long enough to listen. Most of them remembered where they were the morning Emily's car had been found at Mill Creek Park. They remembered the fog, the police tape, the volunteers walking into the forest calling her name. Now, almost 2 decades later, the story had returned, no longer a disappearance, but a murder finally explained. Inside the Ashwood courthouse, the legal process moved forward. Michael Turner sat at the defense table wearing a plain gray suit provided by the county. The confident mechanic who once leaned casually against a pickup truck in his repair shop looked smaller now, his shoulders slightly hunched, his eyes rarely lifting from the table in front of him. Across the courtroom sat Emily Carson's parents. Time had changed them too. Their hair was gray now, their faces marked by years of waiting without answers. But the moment the judge entered the courtroom, both of them sat straighter, as if every part of them understood how important this day was. Because for 17 years, the system had nothing to offer them. No suspect. No explanation. No place to grieve. Only uncertainty. Now the man responsible was sitting less than 30 feet away. The prosecution laid out the evidence carefully. The fingerprint recovered from Emily's car, ignored by technology in 1998, finally matched years later through modern databases. The wallet and jewelry discovered in Turner's home. The shallow grave beside the logging road north of Mill Creek Park. And the confession recorded inside the interview room at the Ashwood Police Department. Each piece of the story fell into place again, this time under the quiet attention of the courtroom. Detective Lisa Moreno testified about the search of Turner's home. The hidden compartment beneath the floor. The moment Emily Carson's watch was lifted from the metal box after nearly 2 decades in darkness. The courtroom remained silent as she described the discovery. But the most powerful testimony came from a man who had technically retired from law enforcement years earlier. Daniel Harper. The former detective walked slowly to the witness stand, the same worn leather notebook resting in his hand. The prosecutor asked the simple question first. Detective Harper, when did you first become involved in the Emily Carson investigation? Harper adjusted his glasses slightly. October of 1998. The memory came back clearly as he spoke. The abandoned sedan. The fog drifting through the trees at Mill Creek Park. The driver's seat pushed too far back. Harper explained how that detail never quite made sense. Emily Carson was 5'3", but the seat had been adjusted for someone taller. Someone who drove the car after she was gone. He opened the notebook slowly. Inside were years of observations written in careful handwriting. Questions. Theories. Small details that never felt resolved. For a long time, Harper said quietly, the case had nowhere to go. Because the evidence wasn't strong enough back then. The fingerprint couldn't be matched. Witnesses couldn't identify a suspect clearly. And slowly, like many difficult investigations, the file was placed into storage. A cold case. But Harper never fully let it go. Even after retirement, he continued reading through the reports, returning to the same small details again and again. Until eventually one name surfaced from the pages of an old interview transcript. Michael Turner. The mechanic who lived just blocks away from Emily Carson in 1998. The man who hesitated when asked if he knew her. The man who owned a dark pickup truck similar to the one seen near her apartment the night she disappeared. Harper's voice remained calm as he described the moment he reopened the file with Detective Moreno.
The fingerprint sent back to the lab.
The match. The search warrant. And the discovery of Emily Carson's belongings hidden inside Turner's home. The courtroom listened quietly. Because what they were hearing wasn't just a detective's testimony. It was the story of how a murder hidden for 17 years had finally been uncovered piece by piece. When the prosecutor finished his questions, the defense attorney stood. Detective Harper, he began, isn't it true that for many years this case had no evidence pointing toward my client? Harper nodded. That's correct. The attorney walked slowly across the floor. And isn't it possible that the fingerprint in the vehicle came from a completely innocent interaction? Harper paused before answering. In theory, yes. The defense attorney stopped walking. So the fingerprint alone proves nothing. Harper closed the notebook gently. No, he said. It doesn't. The attorney seemed satisfied with the answer. But Harper continued speaking. However, the room grew quiet again. The fingerprint alone doesn't prove the case. He looked briefly toward the defense table where Michael Turner sat motionless. But the fingerprint combined with the victim's wallet in his closet, the jewelry hidden under his floor, the body buried along a road he regularly drove. Harper paused. And the confession he gave in the interview room. The detective looked back toward the attorney. Those things together prove everything. The courtroom remained silent for several seconds after he finished. Outside the courthouse windows, winter rain tapped softly against the glass, the same cold Oregon rain that had fallen the night Emily Carson disappeared in 1998. 17 years earlier, the truth had been buried beside an empty logging road. Now it was being spoken aloud in a courtroom where the town of Ashwood could finally hear it. And for the first time since that rainy night long ago, the story of Emily Carson was no longer a mystery. It was justice finally catching up with the past. The courtroom stayed quiet long after Daniel Harper stepped down from the witness stand. His testimony had not been dramatic. There were no raised voices, no sudden revelations. Just the slow, steady reconstruction of a story that had waited 17 years to be told from beginning to end. Sometimes that kind of truth carried more weight than anything else, because it wasn't speculation anymore. It was evidence. Across the room, Michael Turner sat still at the defense table, his eyes fixed somewhere near the edge of the wooden floor. During Harper's testimony, he had barely moved. No visible reaction when the fingerprint was mentioned. No expression when the shallow grave in the forest was described. But when the prosecutor replayed the recorded confession for the court, something changed. The small speaker on the evidence table crackled softly. Then Turner's own voice filled the room.
Low.
Tired. Unmistakable. I saw her walking to her car. It was raining. Emily Carson's parents sat side by side in the front row, hands clasped tightly together as the recording continued. For years they had imagined countless possibilities about what happened to their daughter that night. Now they were hearing the reality directly from the man who ended her life. Turner's voice continued through the speaker. She started screaming. I panicked. The courtroom felt smaller somehow as the confession played. Even the defense attorney remained silent. Because there was no denying the voice. No denying the words. Turner had described exactly how he forced Emily into the car, drove to Mill Creek Park, struck her with a tire iron, and buried her beside the logging road in the darkness. When the recording ended, the room sat in heavy silence. The judge eventually spoke. The trial itself moved quickly after that. The evidence was overwhelming. The fingerprint, the belongings, the body, and the confession. There was no complicated forensic puzzle left to solve, no alternate suspect to introduce, no reasonable explanation for why Emily Carson's possessions were hidden beneath the floor of Michael Turner's home. The jury needed only a few hours. When they returned to the courtroom, every seat was filled. Residents of Ashwood who remembered the original disappearance had come quietly to watch the final chapter unfold. Some stood along the walls because there were no chairs left. The foreperson stood. The judge asked the question. Has the jury reached a verdict? Yes, Your Honor. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. On the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant. A brief pause. Guilty. Emily Carson's mother lowered her head slowly as the word echoed through the room. Not relief. Not celebration. Just a quiet, exhausted acceptance that the truth had finally been spoken aloud where everyone could hear it. Michael Turner remained motionless as the verdict was read. His shoulders dropped slightly, as if some final tension inside him had finally given way. For nearly 2 decades he had lived with the secret. Now the secret belonged to everyone. Weeks later, the sentencing hearing brought the final conclusion. The judge spoke firmly. The defendant committed a violent and senseless crime. For 17 years, he allowed the victim's family and this community to live without answers. The courtroom remained silent as the judge continued. For that reason, this court sentences Michael Turner to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The gavel struck once. And just like that, the long path of the investigation, the cold case that had lingered for 17 years, reached its final legal conclusion. But outside the courthouse, the story didn't feel finished. Because for many people in Ashwood, Emily Carson had never been just another case file. She had been a teacher, a neighbor, a young woman whose life ended on a rainy October night for no reason beyond the impulse of a man who thought he could hide the truth forever. A few days later, a small memorial gathering took place at Mill Creek Park, the same park where her abandoned car had once sat alone in the fog. Now a group of residents stood quietly near the edge of the trees. Some of them had joined the volunteer searches back in 1998. Others were students Emily once taught in the second-grade classroom at the elementary school down the street. A simple plaque had been placed near the path. Not large, not elaborate. Just a small marker among the trees where people walking through the park might pause and remember. Emily Carson, 1971 to 1998.
Teacher. Daughter.
Friend. Never forgotten. Daniel Harper stood near the back of the small crowd as the ceremony ended. The wind moved softly through the tall pines, carrying the same faint smell of damp earth that had filled the forest the day search teams found the shallow grave north of the park. 17 years. It was a long time for a mystery to survive. Long enough for people to assume the truth might never surface. But sometimes the smallest detail refused to disappear. A driver's seat pushed too far back. A fingerprint waiting patiently in an evidence file. A line written inside a detective's diary that refused to fade with time. Harper reached into his coat pocket and held the notebook again. The leather cover was worn now, the pages filled with observations from a career that had seen countless investigations begin and end. But the Emily Carson case would always stand apart, because it proved something Harper had believed since the beginning of his career. Time could bury the truth, but it couldn't erase it. Somewhere, somehow, the truth always left a trace behind. And if someone kept looking long enough, eventually that trace could lead all the way back to the person who thought they had gotten away with everything. Spring came slowly to Ashwood. The long Oregon winter faded into pale sunlight and soft green leaves returning to the tall trees that surrounded Mill Creek Park. The town itself looked almost the same as it always had: quiet streets, the same diners on Main Street, the same small school where generations of children passed through the classrooms every year. But for the people who lived there, something had shifted. For 17 years, Emily Carson's disappearance had been an open wound in the town's memory. A question that surfaced again and again in conversations, especially when autumn rain began falling across the forests outside town. Now that question finally had an answer. And strangely, the silence that followed felt just as heavy. Inside the Ashwood Police Department, the evidence room had grown quiet again. The thick case file labeled Carson, Emily, 1998 was no longer sitting on an active investigator's desk. The cold case had officially been closed. But Detective Lisa Moreno still opened the file occasionally. Not because the investigation continued. There were no more suspects, no more mysteries left to unravel, but because the story itself had become part of the department's history. Younger officers sometimes asked about it. They had heard the headlines. The fingerprint, the diary, the arrest that shocked a small Oregon town nearly 2 decades after a teacher vanished. Moreno would usually show them one specific photograph from the file. The image taken at Mill Creek Park on the morning Emily's car was discovered. The silver sedan sitting alone in the fog. Driver's door open. Interior light glowing faintly through the mist. And the driver's seat pushed slightly too far back. A detail so small it might have disappeared completely if someone had noticed. But Daniel Harper had noticed. Months after the trial ended, Harper returned to the police station one last time. Retirement had already pulled him away from daily police work, but Moreno invited him back quietly one afternoon. The building felt different to him now. The same hallways, the same offices, but time had moved forward. New detectives filled the desks where older ones once sat. Moreno met him in the conference room. "You want to see it?" she asked. Harper nodded. She placed the case file on the table. For a moment, neither of them opened it, because they both understood what it represented. 17 years of silence finally broken. Moreno eventually spoke. "You know this case is used in training now." Harper raised an eyebrow slightly. "For new detectives," she explained. "They study it when we talk about cold cases." She opened the file and pointed to the photograph of the abandoned sedan. "Because this is what people forget." Harper looked down at the image again.
The fog.
The empty road. The door hanging open. Moreno continued. "Most cases don't solve because of one big clue." She tapped the corner of the photo. "They solve because someone refuses to ignore the small ones." Harper smiled faintly. "That seat bothered me for years." Moreno laughed softly. "Good thing it did." Outside the station, Ashwood continued its quiet routine. People walked dogs through the park. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalks. Cars moved slowly through the same streets where Emily Carson once drove home after long days teaching 2nd grade. Life kept moving forward. But every once in a while, someone would stop near the small plaque placed beside the walking trail at Mill Creek Park. They would read the name, remember the story, and think about how close the truth had been all along. Far away, inside a state prison, Michael Turner began serving the life sentence handed down by the court. The world he once moved through freely had become concrete walls and locked doors. No repair shop. No quiet house at the end of a gravel road. No hidden compartments beneath the floor. Just time. Years stretching ahead with nothing but memory. For a man who once believed the rain of October 1998 had washed away every trace of his crime, the reality was far different. The rain had hidden the truth. but it had never erased it. And back in Ashwood, Daniel Harper eventually returned home after his visit to the station. The evening air carried the smell of pine trees and damp soil as he sat on his porch with the old leather notebook resting on his lap. He flipped through the pages slowly. Hundreds of observations from dozens of cases filled the diary. But the entry about Emily Carson still stood out. A simple line written in dark ink many years earlier. Car seat moved. Someone else drove.
Such a small detail.
One sentence among thousands written during a long career. Yet that sentence had helped reopen an investigation everyone else believed was finished. Harper closed the notebook gently. The sky above Ashwood was fading into twilight. Lights began appearing in the windows of houses along the quiet street. 17 years earlier, a young teacher vanished into the darkness of an Oregon night. Her story could have remained unfinished forever. But one detail survived. A fingerprint, a hidden watch, a shallow grave beneath the forest soil, and a detective who never stopped wondering why the driver's seat was pushed just a little too far back. In the end, that question was enough to bring the truth back into the light. And sometimes, in the world of cold cases, that is exactly how justice finally finds its way home. Years passed, but the story of Emily Carson never truly disappeared from Ashwood. It settled into the town's memory the way old forests hold onto the past, quietly, without noise, but never completely forgotten. Mill Creek Park looked peaceful most days. The narrow walking trail curved beneath tall pine trees, sunlight filtering through the branches and casting long shadows across the ground. Families passed through on weekend mornings. Joggers moved along the gravel path at dawn. Children from the nearby school sometimes walked there with teachers during field trips when the weather was warm. Many of them didn't know the full story. But the small plaque near the edge of the trees remained. Emily Carson.
Teacher. Daughter.
Friend. Never forgotten. Sometimes people paused there for a moment. Sometimes they simply walked past without noticing. But the place carried meaning now, not as the site of a mystery, but as the quiet beginning of the long journey that eventually uncovered the truth. At the Ashwood Police Department, the Emily Carson file had moved to a different shelf. Not active cases. Not cold cases. Closed cases. But Detective Lisa Moreno still kept a digital copy of the investigation timeline saved on her computer. She occasionally showed it to younger officers during training sessions when the topic of cold cases came up. The lesson was simple. Time doesn't always defeat an investigation. Sometimes time becomes the very thing that solves it. Because evidence that once seemed meaningless could grow powerful years later. Technology improved. Databases expanded. Old fingerprints once trapped in dusty envelopes suddenly matched records across the country. And sometimes a retired detective sitting alone at a kitchen table decided to open an old notebook and read it again. Daniel Harper rarely spoke publicly about the case. After the trial, reporters called often at first, asking for interviews about the investigation that brought a 17-year-old murder back into the spotlight. But Harper usually declined. Not because he had nothing to say, but because, in his mind, the story never belonged to him. It belonged to Emily Carson. Still, every once in a while someone from a law enforcement conference or a training seminar would ask him a simple question. How did you solve it after all those years? Harper's answer never changed. We didn't solve it because we were smarter. He would pause for a moment. We solved it because we never completely stopped looking. Late one afternoon several years after the trial, Harper returned once again to Mill Creek Park. The place felt familiar now, though time had softened some of the details he remembered from the morning Emily's car was discovered there. The fog had been thick that day in 1998. Cold air drifting through the trees. Police tape stretching across the entrance road. Now the parking area looked ordinary. A few cars. A couple walking a dog. A man sitting quietly on a bench reading a book. Harper walked slowly toward the edge of the trail, where the plaque stood among the trees. He stopped there for a moment. Not out of duty. Just reflection. 17 years of uncertainty had ended because a few small pieces of evidence refused to disappear. A fingerprint hidden in a file. A wallet hidden in a closet. a watch buried beneath a bedroom floor, and one sentence in a leather notebook written by a detective who couldn't shake the feeling that something about the abandoned car didn't make sense. The forest beyond the trail remained quiet. Somewhere miles north of the park, beneath another stretch of trees near the old logging road, the ground where Emily Carson had been buried was now marked in police records as the place the truth resurfaced. But the forest itself gave no sign of the history it once held. Wind moved through the branches. Leaves rustled softly. Nature had already begun reclaiming the scars left by the past. Harper placed a hand lightly against the edge of the plaque before turning back toward the parking lot. The sun was beginning to set behind the hills surrounding Ashwood, painting the sky with a soft orange glow. For many people in town, the Emily Carson case had once been a haunting mystery. Now it had become something else. A reminder. A reminder that even when the trail seems to vanish, when evidence fades and witnesses disappear and years turn into decades, the truth can still survive somewhere beneath the surface. Waiting. Because sometimes justice moves slowly. Sometimes it takes 17 years. But as the story of Emily Carson proved, even the longest cold case can eventually come back to life. All it takes is one small detail that refuses to be forgotten. And someone willing to keep asking the question long after everyone else has stopped. In Ashwood, that question had finally been answered. And the quiet town that once woke to the shock of a missing teacher now carried a different memory. The moment the truth, buried beneath rain and time and forest soil, finally returned to the light.